should I switch off my video as well?
That's fine, Ms. Roy. You can keep it on. Good morning and good evening to our distinguished speakers and audiences who are joining us from different time zones. And once again, on behalf of the United Nations in India and the OP Jindal Global University, a welcome to the virtual dialogue on the ethics of artificial intelligence on the theme Exploring Pluri-Perspectives. Our warmest greetings and welcome to our chief guest for today's inaugural session, Ms. Anna Roy, Senior Advisor at Niti Aayog, who has very graciously taken the time to join us today. And she'll speak with us about India's responsible AI initiatives, which she herself is leading. So thank you so much, Ms. Roy, and we look forward to your address. We spent a fascinating evening yesterday, nearly 4 hours of an impressive breadth of work from all our distinguished speakers, from the ontologies of ethical tech to singularity to determinism railing against free will, from Asimov to Confucius and the laws of robots, and all the way from techno-utopianism to concrete policy solutions ahead of us. So to deliver our opening remarks for today and to summarize the dialogue so far, I am honored to invite Professor R. Sudarshan, Dean of the Jindal School of Government and Public Policy at the OP Jindal Global University. Professor Sudarshan, the floor is now yours. Professor Sudarshan, you're on mute.
That was a very profound discussion that we had yesterday. As you said, nearly 4 hours, and I have a few minutes to just sum it up, which is a tall order. We began with the CEO of the Niti Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant, give us a little overview of the work that's being done, and we have Dr. Anna Roy with us today, who will elaborate on it, because he mentioned 7 principles, but he didn't have the time, or didn't take the time to elaborate on them. And then we had Renata facilitated the first session, which was led off by Professor Wendell Wallach, who began with a reference to Gandhiji's salt march to Dundee. And the reason he did that is to underscore that there are turning points in human history, and that with reference to the ethical challenges proposed by artificial intelligence, we are at the salt march moment. And of course, he's been a great scholar who's written a number of books on the challenges of artificial intelligence, but he referred to Habermas and a legitimation crisis that we have, because those who are responsible for the advancement of this technology are not necessarily in sync with citizens around the world and their concerns. There's already a lot of inequality and a shift in power towards a few oligopolistic companies which are in the artificial intelligence business. So he made references to those, and he made a very powerful plea for an international consensus on what values and norms that should govern as we go ahead. And he was followed by Professor Thomas Pogge from Yale, who brought 2 well-known persons together to begin his discussion Karl Marx, Henry Kissinger, and the proprietor of Facebook, Zuckerman. And the reason he did that is because at one level, if artificial intelligence and robots take over drudgery and menial work that human beings do, you could say that, Marx in his more evocative passages talks about a utopia where, you can, go fishing in the morning and read a lovely book in the afternoon and contemplate philosophy in the evening. That kind of world where human labor is no longer subjected to exploitation and enslavement. But that view, of course, is a utopian one, and AI is not going to bring that about. Henry Kissinger was more skeptical and warned about the consequences of this, particularly with respect to developments such as, guided missiles that are unmanned, drones, and the implications for international relations and warfare with artificial intelligence. And of course, the Facebook, of course, has flourished and knows everything about everyone who's signed up to Facebook and used the platform. And that kind of underlines the ethical challenges of privacy and concerns about that. So what Thomas Porges warned is that we are set for, a situation where there's continual manipulation of choices and ideas and views in a very subliminal way. It's almost as if one AI machine is focused on the one individual, and then you have a network of AI machines that can, link up with one another and manipulate people. And because countries that use democratic processes, you can influence the voters in this way, and political parties like to use this advantage, and there is a bit of a competition in who could use the AI better, maybe, to influence opinions of the public. So we have a problem, he pointed out, that we can't expect national governments to have the kind of regulations that one actually needs to safeguard human dignity and privacy and so on, and those values. And therefore, again, Thomas Porges supported Professor Wallach's plea that this has got to be an international endeavor. It cannot be a national one. Chinmay Arun followed, and she has a background in law and is Harvard now, and she talked about the importance of legal frameworks and regulations that can safeguard human autonomy in this datafication regime. But he also made an interesting point about how colonial powers, in an effort to understand the colonized people, often used informants or intermediaries. And she made a reference to Charles Bailey's work on how the colonial Raj in all the Mofussil towns of the country had their informers. And in a way, artificial intelligence is a kind of a new version, but it could have the same dangers that a colonial power ruling over a subject population could find out things about them and manipulate them. And so she warned about, why we should safeguard against that harm. We had Dr. Ahmed Bawa from South Africa following, who, again, it's interesting, the commonalities in concerns. Again, he pointed out that you cannot rely upon, governments alone to come up with regulations, that this has got to be there's got to be a social compact. Civil society should be very crucially involved in the regulation of AI, and that that in different localities and in different regions we need to have different kinds of frameworks that can safeguard. And so he made a reference to the role of the trade unions, the again an unequal society in South Africa, a diverse society, and therefore supported the call for a kind of a international consensus on these points. Then we had a wonderful presentation on what might happen to robots if they were in fact guided by good Confucian values and principles by Professor Liu, and she gave a wonderful elaboration of the 3 laws of robotics, which Isaac Asimov articulated, which we know all about. And it's very good. I hope the proceedings of this dialogue, we will record in detail Professor Liu's framework of what kinds of ethical norms need to be incorporated even in the very design of some of these machines. In other words, there needs to be in the group that designs these things, it shouldn't just be left to computer scientists and programmers and software engineers, but it should include philosophers and people who could produce these kinds of values and see to what extent, and this is a point, of course, that Professor Wallach had made in his book, The Moral Machine. So then we had a wonderful set of discussions led by Professor Chetan Prakash, which connected in a way the worldviews of the East, if you like, which is what our pluri-perspective quest is all about. And he talked about what is it that we perceive. And we assume that, since we all can perceive what we think is the same object, the object is out there and real. And he and Donald Hoffman have done pioneering work on interface perceptions. So he gave us, if you like, a trailer of what that is, the interface perception, which has to do with, of course, consciousness, and the fact that the analogy that he used is it's like when we perceive something, it's like perceiving an icon on our desktop or our laptop. The icon is not the real thing. I mean, behind the icon, you have wires and various algorithms and formulae running along, but that's not the reality. The icon projects something else. So there is an interface. And the argument there is that evolution has structured human consciousness such that it makes it equipped for fitness, not so much for perception of truth or the veracity of objects out there. And that was a fascinating talk, and he elaborated on some theorems that his work has produced about conscious agents and the possibility of combinations of conscious agents whose experiences and the component agents get entangled, and in a way that's the world. And this was followed by this elaboration of the grouping of consciousness by conversations that were led by Professor Jonathan Edelman, who referred to Samkhya, the idea that that in the Samkhya tradition, it's all out. The world out there is material. It's prakriti. It's nature. So in fact, he even questioned whether we should be calling that intelligence that we put in machines or robots artificial. In a sense, they are just as natural from a Samkhya point of view, because they're out there, and whereas consciousness is completely independent and is not part of that material world that's out there. And the material world is what is perceived, again, that connects to forms of and ways of perception that Professor Prakash discussed. So that was, again, a teaser. It makes one want to learn much more about these subjects and how a philosophical understanding of fundamentally what the world out there is all about, whether artificial intelligence should in fact be called artificial, because in a way you could invest it with a kind of ego, but human consciousness would always be separate and different and above or transcendental, and therefore it's not going to be possible for any of these machines, no matter how human-like or intelligent they are, to be or to acquire consciousness in the way in which you could say the Atman has consciousness. Right. So again, we need to learn much more about the implications of that perspective. And we had Professor Avik Sarkar follow that. Avik Sarkar, of course, is someone who's not just in the philosophical realm, but wants to be able to apply knowledge and apply it to practical purposes, and understanding the different forms of biases that there may be when we depend on artificial intelligence for some of the good that it would do, whether it's in the area of health or education or whatever, human development, if you like. But we need to be careful about the inbuilt biases that they may have. So that was his contribution. And then we had Dr. Akhandadi Das, who brought again a Vedanta perspective to the problem. It's again, if you took that viewpoint, that perspective, it's like one of these machines that you could wear around your head, and you perceive the world through it, and you assume an avatar. So it's like since from a Vedanta perspective, the world out there could in fact be Maya or illusion. It's interesting to see that artificial intelligence could be an illusion within an illusion. Again, that connects to the fundamental element of what being a human being is, which is this thing that we call consciousness, and that's not physically dependent on the brain or some machine or some biological processes. It is something much more mysterious, and since human beings possess that, that's our ultimate safeguard in a way against these risks of artificial intelligence. So you can see it was a very profound discussion, and we have to mine all of these brilliant ideas in greater depth. So I'll stop there. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Professor Sudarshan, for that excellent summary. I am now honored to invite to deliver the special address for our inaugural session today, Ms. Anna Roy, Senior Advisor, Niti Aayog. At Niti Aayog, Ms. Anna Roy, who really needs no introduction, she leads India's initiatives on frontier technologies, and she's also led the development of key policies like the National Strategy on Artificial Intelligence, India's blockchain strategy, and the national approach on a responsible AI for all. Ms. Roy, over to you, and we will also share your presentation on our screen when you start speaking. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nabila. First of all, a disclaimer, I do not lead initiatives for India. I lead these initiatives for Niti Aayog. These topics are so wide and so intense that I lay no claim to be leading these initiatives for the country, really. Especially ethics and AI is something which is there. It is a multidisciplinary, intersectoral subject, and I am just doing a very small part in providing a platform where we can kind of uh, enable stakeholders to have consultations and come out with some kind of a approach paper, a document, a strategy document, a policy paper for the country, for the government. Since Niti Aayog is the premier think tank of the government. So with that disclaimer, I would first of all like to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share my view on this very important topic, and listening to Professor Sudarshan, because unfortunately I could not join yesterday, but from his excellent summary, it appears that a great deep dive was done yesterday by very renowned speakers. I will not be getting into specifics of the topics, but I will give a overall viewpoint and the processes involved from the a policy maker's perspective, really. And that is what I will be kind of sharing. And I will indicate how we approached the entire issue of dealing with ethics and AI, and where we started from, how was the journey, and where we are today. So thank you for sharing the presentation, Nabila. If you could be kind enough to just go to the next slide, please. Yes, thank you. So basically in 2018, Niti Aayog was tasked in the union budget by the then finance minister, late Shri Arun Jaitley, to bring out an approach paper, a strategy document on how India should deal with AI as an emerging technology, and which by various studies was indicated that can play a very key role in the overall economic development of the country. So in June 2018, we released the strategy document. And after that, we worked in an interministerial forum to come out with a implementation mechanism to implement the strategy recommendations. Since then, we have been working on the various recommendations which were there in the strategy document. We came out with a plan on how to have, the compute infrastructure. The cornerstone of this strategy was basically twofold. First, democratizing infrastructure as well as access, and second was collaboration and making it more applied, so that we do not identify the technology for what the technology is, but what the technology can help us achieve, and thus put the technology in the context of the challenges that the countries face. So this was the context. In this strategy document, we did touch upon the ethics issue as one of the issues which needs to be dealt with besides various other points like developing the ecosystem for AI, dealing with skilling, dealing with various other issues which are required, the funding, the other aspects, the role of the government, and collaborations, international collaborations. On ethics also, we kind of identified, called out the important aspects relating to ethics, and laid stress that dealing with ethics, we should kind of focus on technology, how technology can help us dealing with various issues of ethics. So that was a very a very brief reference to this very important issue. And since then, we have been working on this topic as well, besides several other topics. And we in 2020, we released in a two-part deck basically a discussion kind of a, it wasn't a paper, it was a slide deck, but which highlighted the various issues. The first one, in part one, we dealt with the principles, where we propose certain principles for responsible management of AI. And in part two, we proposed an enforcement mechanism, a framework where the principles can actually be, how do you kind of enforce the principles? How do you ensure that these are complied with? So part two dealt with that. After the release of these two documents, we engaged in a global as well as within India stakeholder consultations, where on the principles part, we were able to conclude those consultations after a very extensive interministerial consultation as well. And following that, we were able to release the approach document for the principles part of it in February 2021. On the enforcement part, based on the inputs that we received, we are still working on the paper, and we are yet to kind of conclude the interministerial consultations, which is very important for releasing a paper of this nature. And that is something which is an ongoing task. Next, please. So when we started work on the strategy document, there were three major takeaways that we have in front of us. First of all, as I said, there were several studies which pointed to the significant economic potential which AI offered for the country. Second, the social sectors were identified as lagging behind in terms of investment. So especially those sectors which were characterized by public goods, there we found that private investment was not so forthcoming. And third was that the need for collaboration, as I said earlier. And since India had numerous challenges, especially in the social sectors, it was felt that if you solve for India, you actually solve for 40% of the world. And we proposed the concept of India as the AI garage of the world, because besides the challenges, India also had a very robust ecosystem that enabled very intensive and good research infrastructure, as well as human resources and various other institutional frameworks required for R&D and deployment of AI tools. So based on this, we gave the recommendations in the strategy document, where we pegged the AI strategy for India as AI for all, that is using the technology for the benefit of the majority of the population. And there we identified the major sectors, especially those which were in the social sector and were characterized by public goods, and where we felt that the government should take the lead. And we also proposed a system where wherever the government can kind of, not crowd out the private sector, there the private sector should take the lead. But wherever the private sector initiative is lacking, there the government should take a lead. And if you go through the strategy, a very well laid out kind of a structure was presented on how government can kind of, have the structures in place to work with other stakeholders like the industry, like academia, the international collaborations, etc. Next, please. So in this, as I said, responsible AI was also one of the things which we touched upon, but we did not go beyond making some very preliminary comments. And I need not underline the importance of focusing on responsible AI ecosystem, which would be key to realize the potential, because unless we kind of deal with these issues, we do not generate the trust, and without that the scaling up really will not happen, because the lack of trust is something which will discourage adoption at the field level. Next, please. In the papers that we, the deck which we released last year, we identify the problem in two aspects. First, the direct impact of the ethical issues, the responsible AI issues, and the indirect impact. So the impact of AI system would essentially should be kind of categorized in these two, because they not only have different features, different causes, but the impact also is felt differently. So they would need different approaches to be dealt with. The direct impact need to be studied under the systems considerations, where the citizens being subject to a specific AI system is exposed to certain risks like privacy, like bias, exclusion, etc. And indirect, it's something which affects the larger population, not directly, but because of certain features of the AI systems, say automation leading to job losses. These are to be considered as societal considerations, and these are to be dealt differently and with suggested different approach. Next, please. So under system consideration, I don't think I need to go through it. Already what Professor Sudarshan went about yesterday's deliberations, all these have been touched upon. We are still in the black box era of AI, so we really don't know, in the absence of explainability, there is a lot of problems are there about accountability, about assignability. Then, of course, since it is entirely a data-led thing, the issue of data itself being biased and leading to thus biased solutions is another important problem. So these issues of fairness, exclusion are there. Then the privacy comes, and the security. In this entire digital world, we are all facing it. So privacy becomes paramount, especially because in AI, it is the individual data which is of importance, and not kind of aggregated data is so important. So wherever individual personalized data comes, their privacy and security takes the forefront. And there are legislative and product development approaches for managing these risks, which we have been studying. Next, please. In our journey, we examined the global practices, both legal and regulatory approaches. And here I would like to call out on some of our partners. It is not possible in this kind of a scenario to work in a silo, and Niti Aayog's mandate is to work in collaboration. So the entire work of responsible AI started with our collaboration with the World Economic Forum and industry players like Microsoft, who helped us in identifying resources, legal resources, who were the legal experts, legal practitioners, who helped us in mapping of the existing situation, and giving us the legal side also of it. So I would like to call out on all these partners, and this is in the process, this is the way to go about. We should not come out with something through internal discussions. We should engage in a very, very open manner with other stakeholders, and then based on those stakeholder consultations, it is our belief that policy papers should be brought out in the public domain. And in that spirit, we have again joined hands with UN, and we hope that going forward, our discourse will become more rich, and we will be able to benefit from more wider stakeholder consultations. So basically, we studied the systems in Singapore, EU, as well as USA on the guidance framework for management of AI that they have, their sector specific initiatives, and the various laws which were there in place, and the broad principles to guide the development and use of AI, and the specific regulations for well understood aspects were identified based on this examination. Next, please. We also studied the legal and regulatory scenario in India. So there were certain guidance framework for management of AI, which we kind of came at the end of it. But when we started, then we saw some sector agnostic laws, which were either in the making or already there being implemented. So while PDP bill, the data bill, privacy bill is still before the standing committee of the parliament, the Consumer Protection Act was there, the SPDI rules were there. So there were several agnostic laws which were dealing with the issues of privacy, with the issues of data, and various other aspects, not in totality perhaps, but some aspect of it. So these were studied. We also looked at various sector specific initiatives which were there in health, in biotechnology, in financial markets, in medical devices, etc. These sector specific were also examined. And then we came out with the guidance framework for the management of AI, the 7 principles which were identified at the end of our examination, basically the discussion. Next, please. But we also stressed the point which was made in the National Strategy on AI, which was released in 2018. We underlined the need for following the technical approach. So while laws and rules and policies do play a very important role, but in an emerging technology like AI, we felt that we need to have a very a proper balance, and focus on the technical approach should not be lost, because it is technology which will finally help us overcome many of these issues, as I will explain going forward. So NSCI did recommend this, and in coming out with subsequent papers also, we have focused on this. Here, while I have not mentioned this in the presentation, I would like to refer to the DEPA model, which was released by Niti Aayog in collaboration with iSpirit, which talks about consent-based data sharing. Now, in our view, that is the way forward, because unless you share data, unless you share individual data, you do not achieve the desired potential of this very revolutionary technology. And when I talk about technical approach, DEPA is something one of the things which will take us there, and that is something which we are trying to take to the global arena, and we are engaging with some other countries discussing this particular architecture. And it is our firm view that DEPA kind of frameworks are the future of AI and responsible AI. So when you talk about technical approach, basically technical mechanism for managing AI specific challenges, and we have mapped, and we see that these are really growing, and many of them are open source. They are available, and making them open source, these tools has been vital for the development of the ecosystem as a whole. And ethics in AI is also growing as a field, not only for research, but also not only for research in academic circles, but also for the policymakers and various other organizations who are involved in it. Next, please. the societal considerations, we have not really gone into it in our analysis. These are, part of the whole thing. What are the externalities of using this technology? These are basically the externalities, and these have to be studied, but these are huge topics, and there is work going on, but we have not made it part of our research as of now. We have focused more on the systemic considerations. Next, please. So I'll now come to the principles that were identified. So how did we identify the principles? The principles were essentially developed after, as I said, wide-ranging stakeholder consultations, which were enabled by the World Economic Forum. So we were able to reach out to global experts through WEF. We also reached out to the various resources which are available within the country, practitioners, researchers, industry. Industry actually played a key role in providing inputs. So based on that, we identified these principles, and we also studied the various AI projects in India and rest of the world, and instances of harm caused by AI systems around the world were also examined in detail to identify the relevant considerations in the context of India. And context becomes important because something which may be relevant somewhere may not be so relevant in the Indian context. So what new thing we brought to the entire research is making it contextual for the Indian case. Rights, according to the Indian constitution, it is important because when you talk about any kind of legal framework, it has to be the domestic laws, which is overarching. So that also was examined, and the principles were tested on the domestic legal framework that was existing, and international standards for AI were obviously examined. The various international bodies such as GPAI, UNESCO, IEEE have developed standards which were examined, and in fact we had a very detailed consultations with IEEE at different levels during our stakeholder consultations. And ethics being an emerging field, we feel that, just because we identify these 7 principles, it is not that it ends there. The technology is evolving, the ecosystem where the technology has to grow needs to evolve accordingly, and so is what is considered right and wrong, what is responsible, what is irresponsible, what is ethical, what is not ethical, will also evolve over time. Next, please. So as I said, this will be a growing evolving kind of a document. But as of now, these are the 7 principles which we have identified, which we feel that by following these, these core principles, we will be kind of making the AI development as well as adoption responsible. First is safety and reliability, then the principle of equality, the principle of inclusivity and non-discrimination, privacy and security, providing transparency, accountability, and principles of protection and reinforcement of positive human values. Now, these are, good words, and they are very, very, very important words, but doing kind of translating them in practice is really difficult. So we had a long list of principles, but we kind of restricted ourselves to these 7. And the changing nature of the technology, we felt, would necessitate a regular update of these principles, which can always come later on. And as I said, this would be a growing document as we go along. But reliable structures would be needed to convert these principles to practice. And it is very easy to say provide transparency, but when AI itself is a black box. How do you provide transparency? To what extent do you provide transparency? What exactly do you mean by transparency? Similarly, what is a positive human value? So these are things of much greater research, and in the times to come, we hope to engage with more partners, more collaborations, and come out on each of these principles, with much more deep dives. Next, please. Yeah. So, I will not like to spend too much of time on the enforcement part of it, because as I said, it is still under discussion and deliberations. But some of it I would like to share as something which is still draft for discussion, and something which has not been kind of released formally by Niti Aayog, but only as a draft document for discussion. There also, I have just kind of made a very preliminary, very bird's eye view of the entire enforcement thing. So first of all, we feel that there needs to be a multidisciplinary, intersectoral body, advisory body, that has to be at the apex level, and that should recommend the guidance for creation and development of responsible AI ecosystem. So since AI is intersectoral, it is multidisciplinary, everybody needs to be kind of be involved. We need to have the industry, we need to have the researchers, we need to have the government, we need to have the civil society also here. So this will be the apex body, and below this, then again we need to go more micro, go more sector specific, go more institutional specific. But at the top, at apex, we need one single body. That is what we feel as of now. Finally, what will come out will depend on what exactly emerges from the interministerial consultations. The existing regulatory instruments may continue regulating AI innovations in their individual sectors. As I said, we already have sectoral frameworks in place, like in health, in biotechnology, etc. So they should continue. And practices to ensure adherence must be proportionate to the risk involved. So there has to be a balance. As this is an emerging technology. Too heavy-handedness through regulation and other aspects may then adversely impact the innovation. So a very good balance need to be ensured between the two. The modalities of enforcement would depend on the type of institution we feel, whether it is a public, private, research institution. This is what I meant by going micro. So in a public sector, we again feel that there should be ethical committees constituted for individual procurement. And composition would depend on the particular use case. Now, yesterday, as I said, yesterday we launched a challenge for developing a platform which will do a one-time registration of air travelers, and that will use facial recognition. So for that particular one project, we constituted an expert committee, which was not called the ethical committee, but ethics was one of the things which they were supposed to guide us on. So similarly, we feel each project should, whatever the public sector procurement, each project should have some kind of a oversight. In private sector, we have recommended encouraging self-regulation in general, but there are issues, say third-party audit. Private sector is averse to third-party audit, but say a civil society may want a third-party audit. So these are all very things which are still to evolve, and we need to kind of understand it more. But at the core of it is private sector needs to be kind of made aware of the fallout of not using the technology properly. There needs to be a place for them to kind of say that, yes, we are not doing ABC, but how they will do it is something where the jury is still out, I feel. The next is the research institutes. There we feel that we need to leverage the existing IRB and peer review mechanism and incentive mechanism to ensure adherence. What I have not indicated in this slide is basically the awareness part of it, because most of the time we realize that these considerations are not even known to people who practice in the sense who are either responsible for procuring it or if responsible for developing it. So awareness is something which cuts across, and creating awareness is something which is very important. And that is one of the areas where we are collaborating with UN. And in the coming months, we hope we'll come out with some very good programs and schemes to tackle the issue of awareness. Next, please. This is my last slide. Basically, policies, we need to have policies towards a responsible AI ecosystem, and these policies must be enabling. They need to be clarificatory in nature. Along some areas we have identified. I'm not saying that it should be restricted to this, but some of the areas we felt are important, which we have identified, like manage and update principles for responsible AI, which I have said earlier, research, technical, legal policy, and societal issues of AI. The provide clarity on expectations from AI systems through design structures, standard guidelines, and several other policies which we have kind of flagged. But this is not an exhaustive list. There could be others. And what exactly goes into this? How do we explain this policy? This is the area which we are still kind of discussing with the stakeholders, and we hope to kind of flesh this out and come out with greater details in a couple of months, by which time we hope the interministerial consultations will be over and we will be able to issue the part 2 of the responsible AI paper. With that, I end my intervention for today. And I know we have a very, very rich panelist here and also audience. And I would request you all to come and work with us. And, together we will be able to not only identify the problems, but also bring out the solutions. And actually, it is the mandate of Niti Aayog to provide a platform for stakeholder consultations. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Anna Roy, for spending time with us and for that brilliant presentation. And I think it's really setting the contours for our sessions going ahead, because the sessions we have today are more policy facing. So we have a very interesting conversation coming up on ethical AI and the SDGs, and then on operationalizing pluri-philosophical perspectives on AI. So thank you very much. With that, we come to the end of our inaugural session, with my grateful thanks to both Ms. Anna Roy and Professor Sudarshan. And we will jump right into the first sort of panel for the day, which is, technically the 5th session of this conference. And it's on ethical AI and the SDGs. And without further ado, I want to hand over to the facilitator and moderator for this session, Professor Dr. Milindo Chakrabarty. He's a professor and associate dean at the O.P. Jindal Global University. Welcome, Professor. And I now invite you to lead the session and take us forward. Thank you very much. Professor Chakrabarty, you're on mute.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
So thank you, Nabila, and I welcome all the participants from all across the globe to this exciting discussions on ethical AI. Since we have a rather shorter time frame for us to complete the session, I won't take much time to introduce the theme for today, but what I would just like to recollect and help our participants to recollect the discussions that we had yesterday in terms of two very important and interesting sessions on reimagining humanity and robots as moral agents. The two fundamental points came out from that. One point was that when we talk about ethical AI, we are demanding empathy and concerns for others' well-being while AI is being introduced and being utilized. And this being a very important challenge, the speakers also pointed out the requirements as to how this can be done. They identified the need for a global dialogue involving everybody which will lead to co-creation of AI, a perspective almost missing today. And this co-creation will introduce inclusivity, will deliver justice, and will take away the fear of information asymmetry that the present model of AI is people are afraid of. In this context, I think it will be very appropriate to mention the emergence of the idea of sustainable development goals. If you have a look at it, you will find that the SDGs were developed following the same process that were supposed to be followed and suggested to be followed by the panelists yesterday. It is a process of co-creation. It is a point of global dialogue. It involves everybody. It was concerned about inclusivity and tried to bring it about. It was talking about delivering of social justice, and information asymmetry was to be reduced as much as practicable. And that led us to coining a very important philosophical idea that SDG would aim at leaving no one behind. So I can personally and professionally consider that sustainable development goal has given us a pathway to identify a social problem and its solution in an ethical way. And sustainable development can be considered to be a very important effort and method to think in terms of ethical development. So maybe the way we are trying to follow and achieve sustainable development goals through Agenda 2030 may provide us with some clues as to how we can move forward in achieving ethical AI as well. I won't take much time. I would like to begin the discussion right now. And the first speaker of the day, who would be virtually virtual, because he won't be speaking himself right now. He has shared a video recording of his speech, which we will be showing you. He is Mr. Vivek Debroy, who is the co-chair of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council and served in several capacities with government, academia, and media. He is recognized with numerous awards, including the Padma Shri in 2015. And incidentally, he is quite endowed with a capacity to travel around across several domains like economics, philosophy, and law. So with this, may I request the video to be shown on the screen. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to deliver this talk. Thanks to the UN, thanks to the OP Jindal University. There are various reasons why this has to be done in the form of this pre-recorded format. I've been asked to speak on a topic, and this topic has been given to me under two different titles. One says ethics of artificial intelligence, and the second one says adharma of artificial intelligence. I will speak on ethics of artificial intelligence. The word dharma is a very complicated one. It has all kinds of different meanings in different kinds of contexts. So unless someone tells me what they mean when they use the word dharma, I don't know what they mean when they use the word adharma. So yes, dharma and adharma may be buzzwords, they may be nice words to use, but I don't understand what they mean. It's a bit like people telling me I'm an atheist. I don't know what the word atheist means because A is a negation. So unless you tell me what the theist is, I don't know what the atheist is. Just as unless you tell me what form of knowledge you are against, I don't know what the word agnostic means. So therefore, although one of the titles that was given to me says adharma of artificial intelligence, I will stay away from using the word dharma because I don't know what is meant by it in this particular context. Ethics of artificial intelligence. AI, artificial intelligence, has become a big buzzword. Every once in a while we discover something new and it becomes a buzzword. I still am extremely fond of science fiction. The word robot or robot is used quite a lot, and it's probably now become a general knowledge question, a quiz question. Who coined the word robot? And people who participate in quiz contests will know that this word was coined by Karl Kapek, although Karl Kapek later said that it was his brother who came up with that expression. Karl Kapek in 1920 came up with this word, robot, in his play, Rossum's Universal Robots. I don't think too many people have actually read the play. I don't think too many people have read Karl Kapek's works. Had they done so, they would have realized, not just in that play, but across the entire corpus of the work that Karl Kapek produced 100 years ago, he visited all of these ethical questions that we are asking today. He asked those ethical questions about what he then regarded as modern industrial processes, mass production, nuclear weapons, robots, androids, all questions that were asked 100 years ago. And we keep asking them today because we've simply forgotten that those questions were asked. I said science fiction. And science fiction also reminds me of Isaac Asimov. And Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, which people who read science fiction or watch science fiction films will remember. And there are the 3 famous laws of robotics. 1, robots must not, and it's a hierarchy of laws, robots must not harm humans. First law. Second law, robots must obey orders of humans unless that violates the first law. And the third law is a robot must protect itself unless it violates the preceding 2 laws. So again, in some sense, the questions that were asked by Asimov in his work, as depicted in, let us say, the film I, Robot or the book, are questions that had already been asked, and we are re-asking those questions about artificial intelligence. But the question that remains, and I'm underlining this because science fiction or science fiction writers did ask these questions. Who frames these laws? whenever we are talking about ethics, we are indeed talking about laws. So who frames these laws? And do robots or does artificial intelligence understand these laws? In our arrogance, and I will come back to this point later on, we tend to assume that we have the right to frame these laws, we have the right to ask these questions about ethics, and these questions and these answers, these laws, these ethical principles will automatically be accepted by artificial intelligence or AI, whatever be its definition. And again, going back to science fiction, it used to be a cult film, probably still is, some people probably still watch it. 2001, A Space Odyssey, and HAL. Ethics is always society specific. Ethics is always history specific. As an example, let me mention a story that Bertrand Russell wrote in 1972. It was called A Boston Lady. Bertrand Russell was a philosopher, a famous philosopher, winner of the Nobel Prize, but he also wrote short stories. As short stories, I don't think they were great short stories. Bertrand Russell was better at other things. But they illustrated the ethical dilemmas of the time. And this particular story that I'm talking about, A Boston Lady, was published in 1972. To state it very, very simply, 72, remember? To state it very, very simply, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, caricaturing a little bit. The world is threatened with nuclear disaster. So there is a plane that's flying around 30,000 feet, 35,000 feet above the ground with human beings, and the idea is when this nuclear holocaust happens and the human species is exterminated, these people will repopulate the earth and ensure the continuation of the human species. Fine. The plane crashes. Everyone dies except one particular lady from Boston. Everyone else dies. This particular lady from Boston is the only one who survives. And she's expecting. She delivers a male child. Ethical dilemma before her, which is more important? Is it more important to observe the principle of not indulging in incest, or is it more important to have intercourse with her own son so that the human species survives? As it so happens, she has that physical relationship. As it so happens, the nuclear holocaust is averted at the last minute. A ship comes along, rescues her. She goes back to Boston, where she's shunned by society because she has indulged in incest. And finally, she has no option but to commit suicide. I gave this example to illustrate that ethics and laws and rules are never universal. They are relative, they are history specific, they are society specific. In some particular context, avoidance of incest may be important, in another not. Laws of whatever form, and I'm using the word laws generally, of whatever form, evolved to manage interactions within society. As long as we lived in small communities, everyone knew everyone else, we did not need these laws. But these laws, these principles of ethics become important the moment we move to larger communities where there is anonymity, we don't know the other person, and therefore we need a certain template of rules and principles that goes by the name of ethics. Take the example of the 10 Commandments. Well, the Bible, if you sit down and count, they aren't exactly 10, and the list is not consistent, but doesn't matter. One of those 10 commandments that we remember, all of us do, is that the seventh day is the day of the Sabbath. We shall not work on the seventh day. We follow that scrupulously. Many countries in the world, the seventh day is a day of rest. But what is the complete 10 commandment, that particular commandment? Before it says that the seventh day is a day of rest, it says, you shall labor for the other 6 days. So the complete commandment is not only that you should rest on Sunday, but that you should labor for 6 days of the week. If in certain societies we now have 4 days of the week, we are violating that particular command. Because, as I just said, I'm supposed to work for 6 days in the week. How can I now work only for 4 days in a week? That's a violation of the command. Whenever we talk about things like ethics of artificial intelligence, we have in mind a slightly narrow dimension, which is, does AI have a legal identity? Does AI have culpability? These are valid questions. They are narrow questions in my view, for a reason I will mention a little later, but these are valid questions because now we have a situation where I think in Saudi Arabia in 2017, a robot was given legal identity. So obviously, people who write on law, people who work in OP Jindal, the UN system, they will ask these questions. What is the culpability of AI? What is the legal identity of AI? If something happens because of AI, who is culpable? I said at the beginning that I think AI is a bit of a buzzword. We presume a lot of things will happen because of AI. It reminds me of the days when we were young and there used to be a speculation that if a monkey sat down with a keyboard, would a monkey be able to at random type out the entire works of Shakespeare? The answer is, hypothetically, it is possible, but extremely improbable. The reason I mention this is, I don't know how many of you play chess or follow chess. Recently, there was a chess channel on YouTube, and those who play chess know that there is a black side, there is a white side, there are black pieces, there are white pieces. The AI blocked out that chess channel because it thought the word black smacked of racism. Any question on ethics involves value judgments. The question to ask, therefore, is, are value judgments binary? Yes or no, 0 or 1, black and white? And most value judgments aren't like that. They involve shades of gray. Otherwise, OP Jindal should do a study on how we no longer need judges and courts, because AI can resolve all court cases. The reason that does not work, and that's the reason I gave the chess example, is that everything is not binary. So the moment it comes to questions of ethics, there are these shades of gray. To me, the more fundamental question is the following. Ever since the human species evolved in the modern sense, so I'm not really talking technically about when humankind became Homo sapiens, but let us say 10,000 years ago. In the last 10,000 years, we have evolved a certain hierarchical structure in society. To caricature and simplify, let's think in terms of the categories used at the time of the French Revolution. I'm simplifying and caricature. So you had the 3 estates of the French Revolution. You had the clergy, you had the nobility, and you had the ordinary people, the plebeians. What is the point I'm trying to make? the plebeians were the people who worked. They are the ones who were productive in society. They are the ones who generated revenue, including tax revenue. And the clergy and the nobility were creditors because they survived on that revenue. So the workers were the plebeians, they paid taxes, and I'm trying to make a broader point. I just use that example of the French Revolution as a caricature. They are the ones who paid taxes to ensure that the thinkers, so to speak, and the rulers, so to speak, as predators, survived. As a tangential note, quite often a question is asked, will AI completely substitute for human labor? I think the question to be asked really is, a labor capital choice is a function of relative prices. And particularly in a country like India, the relative price of AI will always be higher than the relative price of labor, because AI is capital intensive, because AI is technology intensive. So in a limited sense, there are some segments where AI can generally substitute for labor, but I repeat the point I just made, that the labor capital choice is a relative one. But let me make that broader point. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that AI takes over the entire work. So we are overturning the structure of society, human society, that has evolved over the last 10,000 years. The workers become completely AI. And now human beings who become things like, well, evolution is a continuous process. So human beings, they evolve and they become only large brains, and they are the predators. Will this kind of structure of society ever work? Which brings me back to the question that if we all become predators as human beings, what makes us think that AI, assuming in that science fiction world 100 years from now AI takes over, what makes us think that AI will accept the ethical rules and the ethical principles that we as humans have devised, as predators have devised? Now this takes you really into the realm of science fiction, which is the Terminator films and Skynet and the extermination of the human race. To me, those are much more interesting questions than these limited ones of, does AI have a legal identity? Does AI have culpability? I think there is a difference between science and technology. I mean, the approaches of science and technology. The approach of science is no longer Newtonian. The approach of science generally is, there's a lot of uncertainty. We don't really know. We are in a world that is full of uncertainty. Contrast that with the approach of technology and the arrogance that comes from technology. And that arrogance tends to suggest, as human beings, we can control everything. We learned to create depth. We have now learned to create life. I think this arrogance is intrinsic in that mindset when we debate ethics, because we arrogantly think AI will come along, help increase the productivity, but as human beings, we will be able to determine the ethics. I don't think it is that simple. I think there is a structural change that is happening, not only on the limited area of ethics, in the way we have thought of human societies for thousands of years. This structural shift will be incremental, not overnight, but that, I think, is what we need to think about. Thank you once again for inviting me.
So a big thank you to Mr. Devroy. We'll begin with the next speaker. Our next speaker is Professor Swaraj Hangla Darom. I am sorry if I have misspelled you. He is a professor of philosophy and director at the Center for Science, Technology and Society in Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, Thailand. He is an author of a book of Ethics of AI and Robotics, a Buddhist point of view, and actively engages in research related to the role of science and technology in the culture of developing countries. We are very keen and we look forward to hear from you, Professor. It's over to you now.
Yes, am I audible? So I would like to thank the organizer of this virtual conference for inviting me, and greetings from Bangkok. And you can see the picture of my university here. I have some slides, so I'm sharing the screen right now. And I don't think I take too much time. I plan to say all this in 10 minutes or so. So let's begin. So the idea is ethical AIs for the Sustainable Development Goals. And the question I am asking is, in what way can AI contribute to realizing some or most of the 17 or 18 Sustainable Development Goals that we have? And as you can see, there is a subtitle which comes from my research, as the moderator has kindly introduced. Compassion as a necessary condition. It comes from the research that culminated in my book on the Buddhist perspective on the ethics of AI. And I will present some main points of the idea here in this talk. Okay, let's move on. So this is this conference, and this is a bit about myself. The main point I am suggesting, proposing is here. AI cannot bring about social goods such as the Sustainable Development Goals if it is not in itself ethical. So I think this talk ties up very nicely with the previous talk by Dr. Devroy, where he talks about the ethics of artificial intelligence. And he mentioned the idea that AI itself needs to be ethical, which is a more interesting question than rather whether AI will take over the world or will replace human workers. So I think our task is how to make AI ethical, how to install ethical components, so to speak, into an AI system. And this is a way to bring back Professor Wendell Wallach's talk yesterday about moral machines and artificial moral agents, artificial moral agents. And in a way, my work is a continuation or an elaboration of Wendell Wallach's idea about moral machines in a more Buddhist perspective. And an argument, an explanation of of why AI cannot bring about social goods if it's not in itself ethical is that autonomy comes with responsibility. So when you have an autonomous machine, a machine that can do things on its own, a machine that can make its own decisions to a certain extent. Of course, we are not talking about fully conscious machine. I don't know when that will happen in the future. There are a lot of speculations, but we are not, or I myself in this talk am not talking about those artificial general intelligence machines. I am only talking about what we have at the moment, algorithms that can make their own limited autonomous decisions, such as self-driving cars and algorithms that we find in facial recognition technologies and so on. Those are the technologies that we have and whose ethics we are concerned with in the world today. So the idea is that autonomy, including limited autonomy of narrow AI, has to come with responsibility. So responsibility is an ethical notion. So it's a challenge for designer, programmer, developer of AI algorithms, how to instill the sense of responsibility and other ethical ideas, such as concern with others, compassion, and so on, into the autonomous decision-making capability of an AI algorithm. So in a way, when the technician develop an AI system, of course, there is something like the functional excellence that the developer is aiming for. The AI system has to be able to do this or that, and so on. However, in order to be able to do that in the best way, in the most efficient way possible, the system must be proficient and it must carry with it all these senses of ethical responsibility and other ethical ideas that are needed. Otherwise, it just won't be able to complete its task. That's the idea. We can look at the more specific examples later on. So let's move on. So I'm talking about what philosophers call a condition of possibility for AI to deliver social goods. So this idea of the condition of possibility is taken from Immanuel Kant. We don't need to go as far as Kant's idea on his philosophy, but the idea here is that we would like to have AI system to deliver, some or more or all of the Sustainable Development Goals. And there was a wonderful talk yesterday that I attended on how AI could actually deliver these Sustainable Development Goals. Wonderful talk, which provided the material for my reflection in this particular talk. So we are talking about a condition of possibility. What would need to obtain? What would need to be there in order for the AI system to be able to deliver all these social goods, such as the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And what I propose, based on this fundamental idea, what I propose is that I come from a Buddhist country. As we all know, Thailand is a Buddhist country, and whenever there are conceptual problems or normative problems coming up, not only myself, but Thai people generally is part of the culture, tend to look at Buddhism. And I think the idea of this particular conference is suitable. I mean, I agree with this idea of looking at the variety of the world's cultures and religious traditions. We heard a very good talk about Confucian way of looking at robots and moral agents yesterday. So I would like to propose that one of the or a possible contribution to the question of the condition of possibility for AI to deliver social goods can come from Buddhist thought. And the idea is that the Buddhist notion of compassion, or in Sanskrit, karuna, plays a key role. So in a way, compassion becomes the condition of possibility that I'm talking about. In what way? There are two ingredients of compassion in Buddhist thought. One is the desire and the commitment to free all sentient beings from suffering. And the other is the more cognitive one, which is the realization that all things are interdependent. So these two aspects of compassion, they need each other, and you actually need the two in order to have a complete idea of compassion. Otherwise, there's a saying, a bird cannot fly with only one wing. So you need two wings. So this more cognitive and more kind of aspirational and action aspects of compassion, they need each other in order for the bird to fly, in order for compassion to be able to do its work. And in what way is this, as I proposed, a condition of possibility for AI for social goods? Well, there is an element of idealism in people working with computers in general. I'm talking about the early days of the internet, the early days of personal computing. Seems to be a long way ago, but I'm old enough to remember all those things. And we can look at a giant company like Google itself. When it started out, there were, or Apple or Microsoft, or these companies, those who started out in the beginning, they were techies, people who, they were nerds, like, they spent all their days in front of their computers and so on. And they, they were starry-eyed, and they wanted to make the world a better place. There was a strong idealistic element in these people. Not only the founders of those companies, almost everyone who worked, it seemed, or at least that is a perception, in technology, in information technology, when it first started out, like 30 years ago or so, they really wanted to make the world a better place. And when these companies grew and became like, a global giant that they are nowadays, it seems that these idealistic viewpoints tend to fade away. But there should be a way to bring back those idealism, because another presenter yesterday talked about legal mechanism. The only way, it seems, to bring these giant companies, those who are responsible for most of the AI algorithms that we have today, the only way, it seems, to bring these companies in line is to have an effective both national law and international regulations. I agree, but I don't think it's enough. What I think is missing is this idealistic elements that you can see in the first bullet of the screen. So perhaps the two, idealism, kind of wishy-washy, but we can think more about how to make that more concrete and more kind of effective later on. And of course, we need education, both for the general public and for the people who get their hand dirty, so to speak, developing the software codes. I'm talking about education of software engineers. They need to be able to talk about ethics or think about the ethical consequences and the relationships that their work bear with larger social contexts. And of course, we need to effect change of mindset into a more mindset that is informed, for example, by the Buddhist idea of compassion that I mentioned earlier. So then that is the gist, so to speak, of what I've been thinking for the past few years. And
Professor Swaraj, we are running short of time. There are so many speakers to
yes.
finish
This is the
20
last
minutes.
slide.
So if you can wrap it up
in
about a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. I would like to give an example of how AI can actually contribute to a more equal, because that is one of the more important goals in the SDGs. So there are many kinds of equality, as we know, and unfortunately, AI has been used to widen the gap between the state and its citizens, thereby increasing inequality. In order to combat that, we need effective justice system, rule of law, democratic rules, those kind of things. And an important point that I would like to emphasize is that AI can also be used to narrow the gap between the state and its citizens, as well as the rich and the poor. In what way? We don't have time. We can come back if there's enough time. And the trajectory of the development of AI cannot be left to chance or be left to the decisions of the global or those who have the power or the expertise to develop, to write the codes by themselves, because interdependence is a key concept in Buddhism. So that concludes my talk. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Swaraj. We are really running short of time, so I
know.
Promptly invite Dr. Wang, Park Hong Wang, who is a senior AI and data specialist and an AI ethicist with H&M Group, a PhD in philosophy from University of Twente, and co-editor of the Journal of Wellbeing in Contemporary Society. and she works in the Confucian ethics of technology. So the floor is yours. Please take about 8 minutes to finish your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again for the invitations. I'm
Sorry.
glad to be able to
I'm sorry,
share.
it's he. Yes.
I'm glad to be able to share some thoughts on ethical AI and SDGs. I should preface my talk with a disclaimer that these are my ideas that I'm presenting here. So I'm not representing any companies with here. In the interest of time, I'm going to read my text. So if you are interested, feel free to contact me. I can send you a version of this. Major tech companies, including Google's, Microsoft, IBM's, and others, have introduced programs to do good and contribute to the achievement of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This initiative, however, have invited a number of critiques for their desirabilities, particularly in relation to the social and political conditions of liberal democratic societies. In this talk, what I'm going to do is to explain or explore this critique and see whether they applies, whether the aspirations to do good applies if we view that from a non-democratic perspective. I contend that Confucian philosophy provides normative resources to answer some of this critique. Based on the cross-culture analysis, I formulate a different philosophical defense of the use of AI for the achievement of the good, or for SDGs, which I shall call AI for Datong. In doing so, I try to reimagine the normative visions for AI based on Confucian philosophies. So what I shall start with the notion of AI for social good and then connect it to the achievement of SDG with AI. Luciano Favridis and colleagues define AI for social good broadly as the design, development, and deployment of AI systems in a way that prevents, mitigates, or resolve problems adversely affecting human life and all the well-being of natural worlds, and all to enable socially preferable or environmentally sustainable developments. As they acknowledge, however, what constitutes a socially good outcome will remain deeply contested. Indeed, the deeply contested nature of social goods is an inherent feature of liberal democratic societies, which John Rawls, the philosopher, called the fact of reasonable pluralisms. And it is the contested natures of the social goods that leads to caution against AI for social good and related aspirations. Just to give an example, Ben Green argued that computer science, artificial intelligence, or data science actually lack a nuanced understanding of what good is, and therefore proponents and practitioners of AI for social good and related projects are often ignorant of the complexities involved in their choices of what constitutes the good, as well as their visions of what is socially desirable, thereby ignoring important questions as to who benefits from this type of project, who will be harmed by it, whether and how power will be shifted after the implementations, and who should make these decisions. These considerations do not apply just to AI for social good, but actually more generally to attempts to use technologies to solve problems, which often hides, ignore, or neglect complexity of such problems. Indeed, if we look into this idea of AI for social good, the idea for good or for SDGs seems to actually imply technologies and technological solutions are intrinsically better than social systems, which presumably actually are the sources of the problem itself. So which AI is supposed to solve. Add to that, there is the problem of computer science and the related field often do not have the appropriate method and toolkits to evaluate the long-term social impact of technological interventions, which in turn result in proponents of this project prioritizing immediate result of technologies and focusing on optimizing the existing technological solutions. In this way, they encourage technological solutionisms, which reduce social and political problems into technical problems to be solved exclusively with technology and engineering. So in other words, we need to be more inclusive in the vigorous methods and tools to examine the broader and long-term impacts of AI technologies when it is applied to solve social problems. One of the responses to the critique that I mentioned is to introduce a substantive account of good, which SDG helpfully serve. I'm not going to explain into detail what SDG is, assuming all of you knows most about that. But despite the fact that SDG offer a universal visions of a better futures for all, the ethics basis of SDG remains an open question, especially with regards to whether SDG are instrumentally or intrinsically normative, and that their normative force derived either from the belief that achieving them lead to a win-win situations for all, which is instrumentals, or from other more fundamental ethical reasons. So referring to SDG alone does not resolve the questions about the good in using AI to do good. But in the remaining time, I shall try to articulate a different normative ground for AI for social good through Confucian philosophy, thereby formulate an alternative visions for using AI to do good, so including sustainable development goals. Confucianism does not distinguish sharply between the right and the good, unlike the liberal views that look to confine the good as a personal matters. Both the right and the good are subject to a substantive normative ideal in Confucian ethics. Accordingly, Confucians would basically reject both the claim that the social good is deeply contested and that there is no substantive good for us to think about AI for social good. In my earlier work, I tried to argue that Confucian Tao is a constitutive of both the good and the right, and it is the ultimate source of normativity in Confucianism. The realizations of Tao, therefore, is equivalent to human flourishing, the good. At the same time, Tao actually specifies the right way of realizing Tao. As one example in the analect states, riches and honors are what men desire. If it cannot be obtained in the proper ways, so proper doubt, they should not be held. Poverty and meanness are what men dislike. If it cannot be avoided in the proper way, again, doubt, they should not be avoided. For Confucian, even if something is good when pursuing in a way that goes against Tao, we ought not to do so. Again, Tao would provide a definitive normative ground for AI for social good, thereby responding to the concern over arbitrariness or idiosyncrasies of the meaning of good for this type of projects, AI for good as well as AI for SDGs. Moreover, I also defend the idea of harmony as a normative standard in Confucianism and elaborate on Kempo Yu's account of harmony, in which he characterized the notion of harmonies as not complete agreement, it's not unprincipled compromise, it is a balance of one thing with another, and it is the mutual complementation or acceptance and rejections. Based on his idea, I argue that harmony calls for mutual enrichment for all parties involved in the situations requiring ethical decisions and aimed at optimizing in and of those concrete situations, which takes into account both what is right and what is good. I contend this understanding of harmony is possessio, which calls for a continuous negotiation and adjustment of relations between human beings, societies, and technologies. Applying that to AI for social good and AI for sustainable development goals, it means that we need to emphasize on various situational factors and the primacy to enrich all parties affected by this type of project, thereby addressing the concern about myopic visions of the good in computer science and related fields, as well as the danger of technical solutionisms in this type of project. So,
Dr. Wang, if you can wrap up.
Yes, I'm going to end this.
We are running short of time.
Tao and harmony afford a different understanding to conceive that type of project. But I think we can use these different ideas or more fundamental ideas in Confucianism, the idea of datong, grand unions for the purpose as well. So for this idea of datong, I'm not going to read the text, but basically datong is the ideal societies expressed by Confucianism that takes datong as a world characterized by belonging and shared by all. That is, individuals should act for social good, but not for individuals' gain, as well as the need to be self-transformative, that it try to transform the basic situations of the societies. Based on that ideas, then the idea of using AI for social or sustainable development goals then need to be aimed for public it needs to be care-centric, and it also needs to be transformative in that it does not just take sustainable development goals as a problem that we aim to solve, but rather what we try to do, or what we should do, is to transform the situation in which that the basic problems that leads to us to find these sustainable development goals will not emerge. So it is a transformative process instead of solutions of specific problems, thereby trying to resolve this technological solutionisms. Since I don't have time for that, but I'll just say this Confucian idea of Datung should offer a different ways for us to reformulate this idea of using AI for social good as well as to achieve sustainable development goals. With that said, I'm going to end my talk. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the discussions or later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. Thank you for your presentation. You gave us a brief idea about the linkage between Confucian philosophy and SDG. Thank you very much. May I now request Ms. Janit Gal, who is an associate fellow with the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence in Cambridge University and a visiting research fellow with Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Nanyang Technological University. She serves as the editorial on the editorial board of a number of internationally reputed journals on AI, and also member of several global initiatives on AI and ethics. So the floor is yours, Ms. Gal.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope everyone is well and safe. So my talk is based on two core arguments. First, there are no technical solutions to social problems, so we should not be expecting AI to be solving any of the problems plaguing the achievement of the SDGs anytime soon. The second is that AI is not an equalizing technology, it is an optimizing one. And that means that using AI fairly recklessly, as we are right now, in service of the SDGs will likely cause more harm than good. So during my year as a technology advisor at the United Nations, I've heard several times that AI will accelerate the achievement of the SDGs. It is not true then, it was not true then, it is not true now. AI in and of itself will not promote the achievement of the SDGs unless we design it to do so. And we rarely do, by the way, because the main use of AI is for commercial profit, because the massive amounts of energy, human talent, and capital that is needed to power really good AI are rarely directed at solving world problems. AI is first and foremost an enabling technology. That means it can, given sufficient data, computing power, human expertise, and financial backing, help us look at existing problems in new ways. It could identify new patterns that may prove helpful in how we address and solve issues. So let me just skip a couple of that for the interest of brevity. One of the problems that we have with AI specifically is that it is an emerging technology with limited capabilities that is often being touted as a silver bullet for problems that humanity has long known how to solve, but never really just got around to doing it. Most dangerously, AI is not an equalizing technology, as I said previously. It is a technology that further concentrates power and control in the hands of the few, benefiting from the use of the many. In that sense, AI optimizes based on identified patterns in available training data. That data, much like the world we live in, is biased. Biased data feeds biased algorithms that there shape our worldview in ways that consistently ignore and undermine underserved and the most vulnerable communities that actually rely on the achievement of the SDGs. So the thing that we have to really acknowledge here is that AI could be a very useful tool if we knew what we were actually doing. And here lies a far bigger problem. The SDGs look wonderful. They are a list of equalizing wishes for what a better world could look like if only we were able to achieve them. They're not a detailed set of tailored plans carefully constructed to fix what's wrong with the world. This is a great list in the sense that it leaves space for new and exciting developments. It has this kind of flexibility and vagueness that allows for complex and innovative solutions that would be needed to tackle such a massive undertaking. It is also, however, vague enough that almost any project could be said to be working towards achieving the SDGs when it is, in fact, very far from doing so. So this caters to yet another bigger problem that with no clear set of plans, the kind of resources needed to achieve the international cooperation needed to pull these resources to achieve the SDGs cannot actually be effectively established and directed. This spray and pray approach looks great in crisp, colorful reports, but it repeatedly fails to yield any meaningful change. And yes, AI should be harnessed to achieve the SDGs, and to some extent already is, with some success. We have seen instances of AI helping distribute humanitarian relief in natural disasters in ways that were incredibly successful. We've also seen AI make false predictions that ended up concentrating resources in the hands of few. So achieving large-scale equalizing wishes, such as the SDGs, will take far more than some powerful software. It will take a collective understanding of how the SDGs can and should be achieved, and how AI can be used to ensure we achieve them without harming those already harmed, whether intentionally or not. To that end, we need a clear, cohesive, detailed, and tailored vision for such a change, and an understanding of what tools should and would help affect it. At the end of that process, we might actually discover that AI is not, in fact, the best tool to use, because it will never be able to substitute the human compassion, idealism, and drive for social justice and equality that is needed for the shared benefit of the whole of humanity to guide such a massive undertaking. If we do find this compassion, it might actually be helpful to use AI in the sense that it will augment them. And that would definitely be something incredible to behold. So my advice to you is seek not to throw flashy, often malfunctioning emerging technology at the problems humans are too preoccupied to solve. Seek instead to use that technology in a careful and mindful manner to augment human solutions to human-made, human problems, to see real structural change take place. Thank you.
So thank you very much for such a brief, but so, I would say, so concise, but very, very deep understanding that you presented about the relation between AI and SDG. May I now call upon Dr. Ketaki Bapat, who is a senior scientist in the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor, Government of India, and coordinating a very important project on Rural Technology Action Group, and which I think is very, very important in the context of both SDG and AI, if they are compatible with each other. She is a PhD in applied biology from Mumbai University. Over to you, Dr. Bapat.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chakravarti, and good evening and morning to all. Delighted to be a part of the virtual conference on dialogue on ethics of artificial intelligence, exploring the Pluri-Perspectives. And congratulations to OP Jindal Global University and the UN India for organizing such an important conference at this important time. So artificial intelligence, we have heard from yesterday from the experts and with different perspective also. But in my mind, what we have learned from now also, okay, that it has it has got tremendous opportunities, and which can be complemented and supplemented for the human growth and our other different verticals also. As you have seen, Dr. Anna Roy also has mentioned a lot, and Niti Aayog has brought out many strategic policy reports, policy implementations, applications, and the role of AI. And it is also predicted by 2035, AI can fetch almost $3 trillion for Indian economy, which is a very important thing if we use it very properly. And also I would like to share, I will come to RUTAG little later on, but with our office's interventions for AI, I would like to share with all the audiences. So this is the Empowered Technology Group, which is chaired by Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India, and which coordinates with various ministries to render timely advice for determining directions and trajectory of government's R&D and technological development programs. And artificial intelligence mission has been also initiated by Prime Minister's Science and Technology and Innovation Advisory Council, which is also chaired by Principal Scientific Advisor. So this ETG, recently they have organized a brainstorming session where the representations from different ministries was there, and many case studies and all when they were sharing. So it is also found that this AI can be used by different verticals or different problem solving things. Of course, we have to really work for the framework and other thing appropriately. And now if I come to the ethics, how effectively we can use AI to overall, elevate our virtues or boosting the group of diverse population. Now here I would like to see the societal practices incidences, as I am also coordinator of the Rural Technology Action Group program of our office, which actually takes the demand from grassroots level. And they have been with innovative way with different IITs. The solutions have been worked upon, and those technologies are transferred to the field level and taken their feedback. And when we say all over, 7 IITs are there across India, we take these demand-driven problems. I would like to say here how the societal practices and how it actually influences. Simple thing is the potter wheel, which actually at very nearby places, Guwahati and Kharagpur at eastern India part. But the same concept of the just potter wheel concept, which was developed by one IIT, when it was transferred and worked at IIT Guwahati, it never worked because the societal practices were different. One was conceptualized with the cycle pedaling kind of a thing for giving the momentum of the potter wheel, but which was refused by this, because here at eastern India, the potter or that work was done at that particular sector by women, and their working thing was a sari or so. And where the at IIT Kharagpur, when this concept was conceptualized, which mostly the thing was done by men, where the cycle pedaling and all this thing happened. So this is a very minute thing. The potter wheel is a very simple technology, but here the societal concern and the practices are very, very important. Now, if the AI or this kind of a thing or data collection is being used to empower these people or to understand their problems, we have to really minutely look at these practices. And that is why while we are working for this ethics or this, we try to add it on AI, or we have to very carefully design our framework or the data set or the problem solutions. And yesterday we heard about Dr. Chetan Prakash when he was explaining about the perception and reality of AI, where it was suggested that these emotional interpersonal relations along with virtues should be also looked at when we are looking at the ethics. And that is why all this, when we are looking at this AI, even though other today's eminent speaker also said that of course it is not the replacement of humans with AI, but definitely we are looking this disruptive technology, that how we can augment it, because today the data collection and all can predict, and in a very beautiful way we can manage the thing. This Arogya Setu or many other apps or many other data can predict something which is very useful for us, that everybody knows. So it has the potential. Only thing, case to case or the cluster to cluster, we need to really work on it. And that is why the ethical practice, ethical virtues, moral values, cultural practices should be really an integral part of the framework. And unless it is an evolving technology, so unless we try it out at the smaller sets or something like that, we will be able to get the proper answers after the observations. And also the community and government are very, very important stakeholders, and other than the developers. This was also told by Dr. Avil Sarkar yesterday's this thing, and I fully agree with that. And that is why the transparency supported with appropriate data sharing policy and all, everybody knows about this, that also should be appropriately thought about it. And yeah, and now if I look at this SDG and sustainability, this is need to have the sustainable community is very important to achieve SDG goals. and which can manage the human or natural and financial capital to meet the current needs. And this is very important, otherwise the technology translation doesn't happen very effectively. So this empowering this community is very important, and for that appropriate measures depending on their practices or the expertise needs to be worked out and considered. Here I would like to also mention the contribution of the Institute of Sustainable Community, which is working across almost 30 countries, and very systematically they are carrying out the work to empower this community and giving the proper knowledge or handling. So these kind of efforts will definitely boost the SDG outcome. Similarly, I would like to give here one very good example that when we are trying to say that we need to achieve the SDG goals, the capacity building and the penetration of AI or this kind of a descriptive technologies at the very early age and in a very appropriate manner, which is acceptable to the local people or their thing. So that is where it is very important. And this I would like to share, as everybody must be knowing that IIT Delhi startup has created a first of its kind interactive DIY, that is do it yourself educational kit based on artificial intelligence, that is called Buddhi, that is build, understand, design, deploy human like intelligence, and it is developed by IIT faculty member Professor Madan Suri. This kit also helps users to develop core skills such as problem solving, creative thinking and ability. And they do not require the special ability while using the kit. So we have the capacity and we have the things. So these are all the things are happening. And now India is enriched with a lot of culture, and as philosophically also we are rich. All eastern part of our world is quite rich, which gives you the philosophical a lot of arenas, lot of philosophers are there. We can imbibe their compassion kind of a thing. Today it was discussed Tao and other Confucius, it was discussed. So appropriately wherever it is we can adopt. I think we can adopt because and we can contribute immensely for this ethical kind of a thing. Here, considering this pandemic, I feel that considering this pandemic situation, which is really affecting globally to everyone, and thus dissolving the geographical barriers, and really it has forced us to think for a strategy to better prepare ourselves to face uncertainty. So how can we, can better leverage AI or working together when it is multidisciplinary and all, we are all forum we are discussing. So can we show something and we can work together? I will stop here. I
Dr.
would
Bapat, can you wrap up? We are running already overshot the time.
Healthy. No, stay safe and healthy. That's all. I'm concluding here. Thank you.
So thank you very much for linking the demand for technology and its supply. And that is, I think, is very, very important in the context of the issue of ethics. But before I proceed, I would just like to, Nabila, that how much time are we allowed to capture from the next session for me to close this session?
Thank you, Professor Chakrabarti. If it's okay with our speakers, I see Swami Sarvapriyananda ji, Ambassador Gill, Dr. Harshok are already online. If it's okay with them, we can take another 5 minutes and.
Okay, then I am not going into the question answer session. There were so many questions and very interesting questions. I would propose that the concerned questions are passed on to the relevant speakers so that if they want, they can come back with their answers and that can be shared with the person who raised those questions. Now, to conclude the session, I found that the session was very interesting and some very important points came out throughout this discussion. Number one, the point that came out very clearly in different ways, that ethics cannot be enforced. It has to evolve, and it has to evolve in a context-specific manner. So ethics of AI has to be very, very careful in the context of that. It cannot be enforced through only legality and legal regulations. It has to evolve from within the society. The second point that came out very clearly is that ethics also is related to reciprocity. And there is a very important concern as to whether the artificial intelligence system will reciprocate with compassion to the users. It is a one-way process. We are giving some codes to the artificial intelligence system and they will work. But when we talk about ethics, we talk about reciprocity, and there is a concern that AI won't reciprocate the way we want it to reciprocate with us. And the third important point that came out very, very clearly and succinctly, that there need not be necessarily a complementarity between the optimizing principles of AI and the principles of harmony and equality enshrined in the context of sustainable development goals. So if we really want to link up AI with sustainable development goals, we have to be very careful in bringing about the required complementarity between them. Because while AI is more geared towards creating value for money, sustainable development goal is more interested in creating value for society. So thank you very much, all the participants. It was a nice experience to listen to you. And I hope on behalf of the attendees and other panelists, I extend a very, very warm thank you to all of you. Thank you very much. Over to you, Nabila.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all our distinguished panelists and Professor Chakrabarti as well. We can't thank you enough for your patience. I know we are running a bit behind time, but thank you so much for patiently joining us through the sessions. I am now honored to invite Professor Naresh Singh, who's the professor and director at the Center for Complexity Economics and Applied Spirituality for Public Policy at the Jindal Global University, to formally begin our next session, which is on operationalizing AI ethics from a pluri-philosophical lens. Professor Naresh Singh, the stage is now yours, and I invite you to lead our discussion.
Thank you very much, Nabila. And welcome to all of our participants who have stayed with us. Welcome to the final session of these 2 days of dialogues. We are now into the final lap, so to speak. And in this session, we want to look a bit at how we will begin to operationalize, to put into practice some of these ideas that have been generated over the last several sessions. But we need to see what kinds of insights we will get when we use a pluri-perspective lens as compared to the dominant Western lens into the kinds of social structures that we would need to begin to put these into practice. So, for example, the individualism of the West compared to the more community-oriented structures of the global South, or the dominant leaders, the kind of state-led versus corporate-led ethics landscape that we have been dealing with. Can we get new, different, fresh insights using a pluri-perspective lens into these structures, which will be critical for the implementation of an AI ethics? So that's sort of the thrust of this session. Time is short, so let me move straight into welcoming the speakers in this session. And to start us off, it is my great pleasure to welcome once again Swami Sarvapriyananda, who has been kind enough in the past to engage with us with our work on applied spirituality and public policy. Swamiji is the minister and spiritual leader of the Vedanta Society of New York and a Nagral Fellow. He was a Nagral Fellow 2019-2020 at the Harvard Divinity School. Swamiji, welcome again, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naresh Singh. Am I audible to all of you?
Yes,
Can you hear me? Yes. And thank you, Nabila, for having me on this very interesting conference on the ethics of AI. I was just reading an interview a few weeks ago with a very eminent psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, who lives right here in New York. He actually got the Nobel Prize for Economics in 2002. And he was talking about his new book, The Effects of Noise, Noise Factors on Issues of Judgment and Error. And then he mentioned something about AI. And he said that it is certain that AI will defeat human intelligence. And it's going to be very interesting to see how we as human beings cope with AI. And then he went on to add that it is not a problem for me. It is a problem for my children and my grandchildren. So there is that interesting thing he flagged about the possible timelines. The way we are talking, it's as if it's imminent. It could be, but again, just yesterday there was a piece in the New York Times which said the search for self-driving cars goes on and on and on. And the whole piece was about how we had predicted, how experts had predicted that there would be AI-driven self-driving cars powered by AI, quite common by 2021 or 2022, and we are several years away from actualizing that dream. Be that as it may, it is a subject which we were aware of in general terms. I was listening to Dr. Bibek Debroy speaking about the science fiction of AI. Those who have been interested in science fiction, as I have, we've always been sort of aware of the possibility of artificial intelligence sometime in the future and the possible ethical implications of that. But now it's very close to us in time, maybe in a few years' time. I was not aware of the possible effects of AI on the domain of spirituality and philosophy. I must thank Rajiv Malhotra's book. This brought the whole issue to my attention, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Power. It's published by Rupa Publications. So, based upon some of the concerns that Rajiv Malhotra has raised here, I'm going to talk for the next 10 minutes or so, 10, 12 minutes, and raise four specific areas of concern. Before I go into that, I'm not complaining about AI here. It's not a negative talk. It's the power and promise of AI is acknowledged, and it is in fact even welcome. It's just that because the subject is ethics and AI, what are the areas in which we need to be watchful, concerned, and prepare ourselves? So I'm speaking only from my perspective, from perspective of spirituality, Indian philosophy, if you will, from that perspective. Four areas of concern. The first area is attention. Several months ago, in fact, last year, we organized a retreat here in Garrison, New York, on meditation. And we had sessions on different approaches to meditation: Buddhist mindfulness meditation, meditation in Kashmir Shaivism, meditation in the Bhakti traditions, meditation in Vedanta, and so on. And a professor of philosophy, Professor Arindam Chakravarti, when I had told him about the scheme of this retreat, he said, that's very interesting. At the end of it, what you should do is take a look at what is common to all these traditions. So that would be interesting. And we found in all these diverse traditions, Buddhist meditation, that's a perspective which does not accept the existence of God, compared to the Bhakti traditions in Hinduism, which are all about God. What could be common to these approaches? The upshot was we discovered what is underlying all meditation techniques, all meditation traditions, is training of attention. So that's the common thing. And that is an area of concern already with our existing internet and social media technologies. There was this documentary film which made some waves here last year, The Social Dilemma, which talked about how social media is impacting two areas. One is attention, and the other one is privacy. So, all these Facebook and Twitter and all these social media platforms, where the first thing we notice is that an enormous amount of services are provided to us, and there is a saying, and it seems to be provided to us free. And there is a saying that if something is being provided free to you, then you are the product which is being sold. And that is true. These modern social media platforms, they provide an enormous amount of free service to us, but what is being sold there is us, more specifically, our attention. So they talk about an attention economy. See, what propels these technologies? What fuels these technologies? It is nothing more than money, of course. It's profit driven. And so what they discovered was it is not enough to provide interesting content online anymore. One must in fact specifically try to grab the attention of the person. The whole idea is that these platforms make money from advertisement, and so that demands our attention. What they have been doing in Silicon Valley is designing and fine-tuning these platforms so that they kind of train us into distraction. Instead of concentrated and focused attention, we are being trained into distraction. Let me give a practical example of what is meant by this. Our phones, I also have one of those, these smartphones. Have you noticed how once in a while they buzz or beep or there's a ting sound and something has come, maybe a notification, maybe a little message or a text or something. It seems innocuous, but there is something insidious there. The idea there is that it functions on the same psychology as the slot machines and gambling machines in Las Vegas, for example. They provide us with some incentive to keep looking, to keep trying, and it seems it trains our neuropsychology to keep giving us bursts of dopamine once in a while, so that we get sort of addicted to keep looking at the device, at the smartphone or whatever. The more we look at it once in a while, we get a little bit of pleasure. This is the psychology of addiction. What is the advantage to these platforms? We are looking at them more and more, and of course that leads to more advertisement revenue for them. As far as I understand, this is the point of these, these constant notifications. One point here is that this means these technologies are not neutral. We always have this cliched idea that after all, it is a technology, and we've been hearing this also, that it is a technology. It can have good uses and bad uses. It's a tired old cliche. Some technologies are not neutral. Somebody explained it very well. In this country, people have guns. They keep a lot of guns, unfortunately, at home. So the practice is to keep the gun cabinet, liquor cabinet and gun cabinet under lock and key so that children cannot touch them. Now, if the technology were neutral, it can be used for good or bad. Why would you keep it under lock and key? Because everybody knows that there are some technologies which are more prone to accidents, to causing damage. The way our internet technologies are going, the way artificial is coming, is a kind of technology like that, which is not neutral. It can actually, and it is already causing some kind of damage. Teachers and students are already talking about a phenomenon they call continuous partial attention. Continuous partial attention. It's something that we are all aware of. In fact, in meetings, in classrooms these days, you will notice it's not that people are not paying attention. People are paying attention, but only intermittently. Sometimes they're looking at their phone, sometimes at their laptop, and then again listening to you. It's something that people who are listening here on this platform may also be experiencing right now. Now, what is the problem here? One big problem is in spirituality, as I said, all meditation techniques depend upon attention, upon the training of attention, on the ability to focus and hold focus for long periods of time, whether it is following the breath in mindfulness meditation or concentrating on the deity or holding a visualization, in whichever way, or self-enquiry in Vedanta, whichever way, the fuel, the, the fuel behind these practices is attention. Now, the more we become distracted, the more difficult it is to pay attention, to continuously hold attention. This has already, it is having severe effects in education, in corporate life, in every sphere of human interaction, where people are always a little bit distracted. But the most severe impact will be on people who try to meditate, for example. It will become almost impossible. So this is one area of concern. The spirituality depends on attention and the training of attention. What these technologies are doing, and will probably do in an exponential fashion in the near future, is train us in the opposite direction, surreptitiously, without our knowledge. From a very young age, children will be trained to distraction and restlessness. So this is one point. The second point is community, selflessness, altruistic action, what one might call, the term karma yoga, which basically means that our instinctive, the instinctive urge is to act for ourselves selfishly. And if one wants to be spiritual, one must extend the boundaries of the self, include others. So engage in selfless action, in altruistic action, in service activities, for example. Now, what is the connection to AI? One problem could be, and is already is that these technologies tend to cut us away from our fellow human beings. It's a common sight everywhere. If you go to an airport, not in these pandemic days maybe, but usually at an airport or a railway station, you will see hundreds of people, thousands of people, all sitting close together, but not interacting with each other. They are all looking at their screens and they're absorbed in their screens. I go for walks in Central Park here, a beautiful place, but half the time people are on their screens. They're not looking around. In one of the Upanishads, I think the Katha Upanishad, it is said, why is it that it's so difficult to realize the truth about ourselves? The problem is that we are continuously externalized. Our senses flow outwards. So that is the problem. We are always looking at the world outside and not inside, and therefore it's difficult to realize the truth about ourselves. So in the Upanishad, it says this. I remember many years ago, I chanted that particular verse in a talk, in a conference. And the moderator, who was a retired IFS officer and a very erudite lady, she stood up and said, Swamiji has said that we are too much engaged in looking at the world outside, we should look within. And I'm saying that it would be good if we were engaged in looking at the world outside. We are not even looking at the world outside, we are looking at our screens. And that's now. Imagine when AI comes in, how much more immersive that experience will be. The problem is that we might be so immersed in our virtual worlds that we forget to interact with our fellow beings. We lose the sense of community, and that makes compassion more difficult. There have been studies which have shown that compassion, first of all, requires attention. Again, we are back to the question of attention. We must first be aware of our fellow human being and the suffering of that human being, and then only compassion is evoked. If we do not at all pay attention to the person next to me on the subway or in the park, how are we going to be aware of the suffering of the others? And where will be the motivation then be for for compassion and for altruistic action? So that's a second problem area, that how can there be motivation for altruistic action, for compassion, when we are not aware of our community of fellow human beings? The third area of concern would be what might be generally called bhakti. All religions, theistic religions, it's about God, but even the non-theistic religions like Buddhism and Jainism, The feeling of love and compassion and devotion is to be cultivated. So what is the underlying philosophy is that our desires continuously flow out in 100 different channels through to the world, and ultimately these are not satisfying. If you really want satisfaction and peace of mind, you have to collect all these desires and sublimate them and focus them either towards God or a transcendent being, enlightened being like the Buddha or the Jina or whatever it is, and focus it in the love of all beings. Now, if AI, and it's almost certain that AI is going to be driven by the profit motive, it will even more insidiously, more effectively seek to fulfill every little desire and maximize our outward urges, our desires for 100 different things in the world. Because it's going to be market-driven, profit-driven anyway. So that's another area of concern, that our bhakti traditions might be impacted. And finally, from the perspective of Vedanta, the path of knowledge, there is a curious similarity with the way AI functions and how Vedanta functions also, but ultimately they are very dissimilar. What is the similarity? Both of them, they inquire into our sense of self, and then analyze it. Vedanta says that your apparent sense of self, that I'm this limited body and mind, this is not true, this is a false self. And we are shown by arguments and insights how we cannot be the body, how we are not the mind, that we are the spirit of the Atman, the witness consciousness beyond body and mind. What AI does also is it analyzes our thought patterns, speech patterns, and behavior patterns, building up enormous databases, and then analyzes it using algorithms. So the ideas of an algorithmic self, so that it can be analyzed and divided and then focused upon and then micromanaged sort of. But the problem with AI is that ultimately it does not find anything higher or transcendent beyond this. So there is a huge philosophical difference. The materialistic basis of AI and the spiritual basis of all our religious and spiritual traditions. If I were to put it in one sentence, it would be the basis of AI is that consciousness is ultimately material and can be infinitely subdivided and analyzed and controlled and manipulated. The spiritual approach is consciousness is not material. It is transcendent and it is indivisible. And that is where we must ultimately seek to find meaning and peace and transcendence. So these 4 areas of concern which we need to look out for and manage in the years ahead. The area of attention, the importance of focus versus distraction, the area of altruistic action. Unless we are connected with our fellow beings, I'm afraid unselfishness, altruism might disappear altogether. And the area of devotion into some higher power, that is one area that might be impacted. And finally, the very philosophical idea of what is a human being, what is our ground reality, fundamental reality. There seems to be a conflict between the AI version of a human being and the spiritual version of what a human being, of what we truly are. All right, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. Thank you so much for this special address and for your clarity on these 4 areas of concern, which I'm sure we will all bear in mind. And now it's my pleasure to move on to Ambassador Amandeep Gill. Ambassador Gill is Senior Fellow and Project Director of the International Digital Health and AI Research Collaborative at the Graduate Institute for International and Development Studies in Geneva. Ambassador Gill has had a long history of diplomatic posts and engagements with the United Nations, in which he has looked at the ethics of all kinds of traditional weapons. Today, he will look at the ethics of the weapon of AI. So, Ambassador Gill, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Singh, and thank you to the UN and the OP Jindal University for this opportunity to talk about operationalization of pluri-perspectives, ethical perspectives on AI. So I'll bring a few background domains into my 10-minute remarks. One is that of an engineer. So I studied electronics and ICTs many years ago. So at that time, AI was around. So it's just that this current version of AI that we see with the dominance of machine learning, the tools were not there to pursue this, but AI has been around for a long while. I would also bring in some perspectives from multilateral work on harnessing technologies for good and avoiding their misuse, whether it's nuclear technologies, space technologies, cyber weapons, and more recently work on AI ethics with UNESCO, where we've drafted as a group of 24 experts from across the globe a recommendation on AI ethics. And finally, I'd bring some perspectives from my current work at IDEAR, which is a global platform to build in a distributed CERN-like manner digital public goods and other enablers for using AI technologies responsibly in the pursuit of Sustainable Development Goals 3 and 17. I want to begin my remarks by joining myself with Swamiji on the importance of attention. The current digital economy is the attention economy. So finally, the attention was called the jewel in traditional spirituality, whether you come from a Buddhist tradition or you come from the tradition of Vedanta. Attention was the real jewel. Anything that you put attention on grows. Now we see trillions of dollars can grow with attention. That's the nature of the digital economy. The other thing that AI is doing, and I'm not debating the pros and cons here, is that it is bringing us face to face with questions about our true nature. What makes us human? What is the true nature of intelligence? And I was struck by a reference to Buddhi in one of the previous panels. So in the Vedantic understanding, Buddhi was never here. Buddhi was here. It was the higher intelligence that we humans as beings of light have access to. So intuition comes from Buddhi. Some of our most creative thoughts, poetry, for example, come from Buddhi. But we have in our kind of, in a sense, modern version of spirituality, reduced Buddhi to traditional intelligence, which is mind stuff. So I think the first step in operationalizing plurilateral perspectives on ethical governance of AI is understanding intelligence, understanding what AI is. AI is a kind of mind stuff. It is not the kind of intelligence that humans are capable of. So we should stop anthropomorphizing AI capabilities. And here allusions to killer robots and so on are never helpful. So we should understand what it is. It is essentially the application of certain rules to data, and data is always about the past. So this is the other thing that we need to understand about AI, which is that it is rooted in the past. It is never about this moment. It's never about what happens next, although it claims to make predictions about what happens next. So using data from the past, AI makes some predictions for the future. And we know how deluded we can be with the past, with our past conditioning, sanskaras, as they are called in the Vedantic tradition, which are literally snippets of tape recordings about what we've heard or picked up. And they're not the objective reality. So I think we should be mindful as we debate spirituality and ethical perspectives in AI about what this really means. The third point I want to make is that this is a very powerful way of aligning soft governance across the globe. So some people just look at it as, oh, ethical principles. Yes, we should have ethical principles, and let's move on to something more practical, like binding legal obligations. But when technology is moving so fast and different national programs on AI are picking up speed and going in their own direction, and there's no overarching international framework for regulating AI and data use. There are good national and regional examples, the EU GDPR, for example, or the Indian law that's in Parliament. But how do you make it come together across the globe? And I think the starting point is ethics, is values and principles. But then the next practical question is, whose values and principles? Are they coming essentially from the Greco-Roman tradition? And there are very good things coming out of that philosophical tradition. You see that reflected in a lot of the AI principles you see today. But is that all? What about philosophical traditions, ethical traditions from Africa? The concept of Ubuntu, the collective community-based approach to good, so that when you harm someone, you're harming yourself, you're harming the entire community. This kind of a notion of hygiene about good, that comes from that very powerful philosophical tradition. The notion of heixie in the Chinese tradition, harmony, again linked with not doing social harm. And then coming to, because this is the theme that's been given to me, what is it that we can learn from the Indian spiritual traditions? And I think we are very fortunate in India to have had thinkers, the best thinkers about the mind. Since AI is about imitating some of the aspects of mind, and in a sense, augmenting our human capabilities. So we can learn a lot from these thinkers. And to my mind, the best thinkers on this have been the Buddha and Patanjali. So coming from the Buddhist tradition and from the Vedantic tradition. And from Patanjali, in fact, we can borrow two aspects to guide our way forward on AI. One is the notion of yama, which is in his 8 limbs alongside niyam and yam. Yam is duty towards others. What is it that we should be mindful of as we interact with others? So one of these principles of yama is ahimsa. So not just the absence of violence, but doing no harm. So I think that's in many of the principles today with regard to AI, you see that first, do no harm. Don't violate the rights of others. Don't be cruel to others. So that's a very powerful way of regulating AI. Likewise, asteya, which is in a sense, if you're talking about data, you should not misuse other people's data. You should not fool them with it or steal value from it. So these are very powerful ways of regulating the use of AI in society. And then the notion of pratyahara that comes from one of the 8 limbs of Patanjali. And I want to conclude with this, because what does pratyahara mean? It means you rise above the flow of data. You rise above what your senses are bringing in. So what, this data that's coming in, that has come in the past, etc., you rise above it. So this gives you altitude over AI, and it prevents you from getting deluded. So if we can combine these insights from the Indian spiritual philosophical traditions with comparable, compatible insights from African ethics, from Chinese ethics, Hebrew ethics, the notion of tikkun olam, which is literally doing good, in a sense, making the world a better place, then I think we would come to a plurilateral ethical perspective that can help us harness AI technologies for good and prevent their misuse. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Gill. That was really great. And thank you so much for both you and Swamiji for staying with the time. As we all know, we are a bit pressed for time, so we need to be very sensitive to the time. Let me move on. In fact, one thing I wanted to mention that struck me, the way you articulated the African philosophy as well. I've always been very interested in the statement in Western philosophy, I think, therefore I am, and in African philosophy, It says, I am because we are. Quite an interesting distinction. Let's move on to our next speaker, Dr. Peter Hershok, who is the director of the Asian Studies Development Program and coordinator of the Humane AI Initiative at the East-West Center in Honolulu. Dr. Hershok, over to you, and you have your 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's truly a pleasure to be here as a part of this conference. My thanks to both UN India and to the OP Jindal Global University. Over the last decade, considerable ethical attention has been directed to the far scientific horizon of AI and the existential threat of a technological singularity, the advent of artificial agents that are capable of acting in their own self-interest, not ours. But what should worry us just as profoundly and much more immediately, I think, is the synthesis of human and machine intelligences in alignment with current human values. Consider an analogy. The technologies of the second and third industrial revolutions scaled up human intentions for over 200 years before it became obvious that industrial uses of fossil fuels would at some point irreversibly alter the planetary climate system. Humanity's failure in the 50 years since then has not been a scientific matter. It's not been a matter of technical shortcomings that we have failed to halt or ameliorate the effects of climate change. It is a matter of conflicts among dominant environmental, economic, political, and cultural values. That climate change is not a technical problem, it is an ethical predicament. In the same way, the fourth industrial revolution, the intelligence revolution, is revealing a predicament, a nexus of conflicting human values that, if left unresolved, will result in irreversible changes in the anthrosphere, the sphere of human endeavor. Only this change is not likely to occur over a matter of centuries, but decades. Stated in Buddhist terms, the ongoing materialization of human intentions by intelligent technology is functioning as a karmic accelerator, a recursively amplifying, wish-fulfilling system that is precipitating our arrival at what I think can be referred to as an ethical singularity, a historical choke point at which the opportunity space for practicing ethics or the art of human course correction collapses, a point beyond which we will have no more chance of escaping our collective karma than we have, that light has, of escaping a cosmological black hole. I think that the radical nature of the predicament of intelligent technology has been touched on by the previous two speakers, and that is the advent of a new kind of attention economy. Prior to the internet and 24/7 wireless connectivity, attention could only be harvested and converted into revenue through the one-way use of mass advertising to stimulate demand for mass-produced goods and services. The digital infrastructure of the attention economy 2.0 is a complexly recursive system that involves drafting the users of digital search, social media, and e-commerce into doing double duty. First, as consumers of individually targeted material and informational goods and services. And secondly, as producers of training data for machine learning systems that are tirelessly and creatively accelerating and expanding the revenue-generating processes of attention capture and exploitation. And this is affording corporations and states unprecedented gains in both predictive accuracy and behavioral influence that is affording them previously undreamed epistemic and ontological powers. And not surprisingly, given what's at stake, a new great game is underway. A global competition not for land and labor, as it was in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but for time and attention. A competition that I think, without hyperbole, can be characterized as a competition for global advantage in the colonization of consciousness itself, the transmutation of the human experience from the inside out. Well, the central appeal of these transformations that are being mediated by intelligent technology are frictionless freedom of choice, the ability to get what we want nearly instantaneously, whether we're talking about digital or physical goods, social connection, or a rapidly expanding range of smart services. All of this in exchange for nothing more than our data exhaust. And on the face of it, that might appear to be a technological dream come true. But seen through Buddhist lenses, it's a dream from which we would do very well to quickly awaken. One of the founding insights of Buddhist thought and practice is that sentient presence is a qualitative relational function of karma, or the nonlinear causality that obtains among patterns of values, intentions, and actions, and consonant patterns of experienced outcomes and opportunities. All technologies are karmically significant. Unlike tools, which are localizable artifacts designed to extend human capacities, and which can be aptly evaluated in terms of their task-specific utilities, technologies are relational systems, non-localizable systems of material and conceptual practices that embody and deploy both strategic and normative values, qualitatively transforming our relationships with the world and with one another. Strictly speaking, we neither build nor use technologies. We participate in them. And technologies can only be evaluated ethically in terms of how they affect both human-human and human-world relations. What is distinctive about intelligent technology, it is not a passive actor in this human-technology world relationship. Intelligent technology is an active partner in that relationship, a partner that is currently primarily directed toward making ever more effective uses of the desires, the values, and the intentions that are encoded in our digitally manifest patterns of attention to recursively command further attention. In effect, algorithmic systems are actively and innovatively reinforcing the readiness of desire-defined individuals to exercise ever greater powers of choice in exchange for granting corporate and political actors ever more precise powers of control. And this amounts to the synthetic scaling up of a logic of domination, not based on overt acts of coercion, but on ambiently reinforced craving, the creation of environments in which choice is at once and indistinguishably compulsive and compulsory. As this feedback loop intensifies, our individually tailored experiential options will become both more extensive and more acutely desirable, but at the cost of our most basic sentient right, the right to freedom of attention, a freedom without which we are incapable of doing anything that makes a meaningful difference in our own lives or in the lives of others. Without freedom of attention, there is no freedom of intention. Without freedom of intention, the ethical dimension of the human mind and intelligence collapses. Creative course correction becomes impossible. Most AI ethics standards and guidelines address the risks of accidents of design and misuse by design. This is important, it is necessary, but these are tool risks. Technological risks are structural and relational. They're a nonlinear function of how decision-making environments, societal dynamics, and qualities of agency and sentient presence are affected as a technology ever more pervasively scales up the karmic feedback feed-forward loops of ever more readily enacted rather than critically evaluated values and intentions. Every ethical system has blind spots. To resolve the predicament at the heart of intelligent technology, realizing its promises while avoiding its perils, no single ethical system will suffice. Negotiating and navigating our way beyond the ethical singularity ahead will require ethical improvisation and shared pursuit of ethical diversity, where diversity is not mere variety. Diversity is a qualitative relational achievement of engaging differences as the basis of mutual contribution to sustainably shared flourishing. To resolve the predicament of intelligent technology, we do not need a new species of ethics. We need a resiliently intercultural ethical ecosystem. An approach to ethics in which the basic unit of analysis is not individual agents, actions, or patients, but qualities of sentient presence and interdependence. We need a truly relational ethics to get at the predicament that is at the heart of intelligent technology. Intelligent technology is holding up a mirror to humanity. To change the evolutionary arc of the intelligence revolution, it will not be enough to continue being a human in the ways that we have been until now. Being human in ways that make it incapable for us to generate, for example, the resolve that is needed to end hunger, to end armed conflict, or to halt climate disruption. It will require embodying instead shared clarity about and commitment to becoming ever more virtuosically humane. Framed in Buddhist terms, The hope is that intelligent technology will then begin to reflect and recursively amplify the values and the intentions that are involved in perfecting our capacities for and our commitments to being present with the generosity, the moral clarity, the valiant energy, the patience, the attentive mastery, and the wisdom that is needed in any given situation to realize truly kushala, that is virtuosic, superlative outcomes, changing the relational dynamics that we're a part of in a way that is virtuosic, and diminishing at the same time those that are without virtuosity. Crucially, just as in virtuosic musical performances, establishing new standards of musicianship, kushala conduct, this virtuosic conduct that is part of Buddhist practice and other traditions of spiritual practice, is a way of establishing a course beyond what is considered bad and mediocre today, but also beyond what is conventionally considered good. Ultimately, nothing other than virtuosically being humane will enable intelligent technology to afford us both equitable and more humane futures. Our futures, the lives of future generations, depends on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harshaka. Among all the very interesting and important links you made, you made also the link between attention, intention, and the possibilities of creative course correction. I believe is so crucial to this, and all three speakers have in fact made that link to attention, which Swamiji started. But let's move on in order to try and catch up a little bit on time to our next speaker, who is Dr. Chaitanya Giri, who is a fellow, Space and Ocean Studies, Gateway House. Dr. Giri works at the intersection of emerging techno-geostrategy, space and science diplomacy, and exploration sciences. Dr. Giri, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Singh, for introducing me so charitably. I also thank UN India and OP Jindal Global University for inviting me to this August gathering. You know, the synopsis of this session is leading into deep terms like dharma and nyaya. However, at a time when human understanding of these two lexicons has been limited, I don't expect AI to be profuse with it anytime soon. Having said that, I'm quite interested in delving into the phrase long history of humanity, which has also been mentioned in the synopsis, and I'll delve into that. India's antiquity is intimately linked with the antiquity of our languages. Over the years, India has been home to opulent language dictionaries catalogued as Shabdakosh, Shabdabandh, Amarkosh, Dhatukosh, and many that grew from Sanskrit's daughter languages. Languages are known to grow prosperous over time, and Indian languages enjoyed all the time over the millennia. And this prosperity comes via literature. Now, for India, Sanskrit's antiquity and its motherly attribute as a progenitor of Indo-European languages makes it the most abundant of all languages. And in this abundance, there is an immense potential for Sanskrit to become of great utility in the comprehension of AI and in our continuing comprehension of ethics. As Professor Singh introduced me, I'm not a linguistic person, I'm not an epistemology person, nor am I into artificial intelligence. My background is more into astrochemistry. I study the chemistry happening in the universe, including the formation of life on planets. And these are processes that happen over billions of years. And my study offers me an atypical perspective on the evolution of life, from inanimate prebiotic chemistry to sentient beings that we are right now. Coming back to language again, if we think in modern English, today's lingua franca, all the decent citizenry of the world truly want ethics to prevail. In common parlance, ethics evoke a binary between the correct and the incorrect, the right and the wrong, and the moral or immoral. And we all want to be on the positive side of it. But suppose we replace English with Sanskrit and we start exploring the massive lexicological expanse of Sanskrit. In that case, ethics become highly dependent on the settings it is used in. For instance, let us choose a Sanskrit synonym for ethics, and that is niti, and do a meta search of all the words that uses this niti as a suffix. We come across so many of them. Rajniti, which is related to politics, Rananiti, which is related to warfare, Arthaniti, which is related to economics, Dandaniti, which is related to law, Kutaniti, which is strategy. Then there is Suniti, which is a good ethics, Kuniti, which is a bad ethics, and there's so many of them. Ethics along the Sanskritized reasoning can have various dimensions and depend on the matrix in which it is viewed. The niti of a carnivorous animal, the niti of an herbivorous animal, or an omnivore like humans in an ecosystem is bound to be different. And this difference is what maintains order in the nature. Now, spoken languages therefore have become keys for advancement of ethics, regardless of its application. And one such spoken language would be Sanskrit. Now, in Sanskrit literature, again, there is an immense treasure trove of Prakriti Darshan, which is the study of nature, as is evident from numerous treatises that are present in this language. And these treatises will be important as we humans study ethics in the context of AI. And this darshan, the Prakriti darshan, is very important because there is a lot to learn from nature and the various natural intelligences that have evolved before humans and that are evolving along with us. Now, in today's context, the term intelligence is used quite profusely. We tend to call engineered systems operating on cause and feedback loop, smartened by complex sets of instructions that go by the names of algorithms, as intelligent. Now, that is a bit of a stretch. In reality, it is humans that have learned to develop better engineered systems. These systems that we've created have spent thousands of human hours, not only on its engineering advancements, but these systems have been fed with billions of gigabytes of data. And as a result, the systems can now compute a colossal number of tasks of varying complexities. Significant technological progress in the trinity of algorithm, robotics, and sensors have made machines highly dexterous. And this is something that we discussed in yesterday's session on robots as agents. And these robots now can do unimaginable tasks than earlier imagined. However, none of these systems have reached a stage where AI has become emergent in a way that it can think for itself and it can self-reproduce. Now, the concept of self-reproducing automation was first imagined by John von Neumann, the celebrated systems theorist. But AI is very much far from self-reproducing. But that doesn't mean a philosophical inquiry into understanding intelligence should not be delved into. And I am glad this entire session, this virtual conference is doing that. Now, the distinction between the inanimate, intelligent, sapient, and sentient is made in Bhagavad Gita when Shri Krishna says to Arjun that the working senses are superior to inanimate matter. The mind is higher than such senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind, and the soul is higher than intelligence. Now, in that scheme of things, we don't know whether AI fits into any of these parlances. And before going in any further with AI and ethics, I ponder, usually, have we aptly termed AI as AI? Is it really intelligent? We humans have been the most intelligent species on this planet for quite some time now. Still, we need not be under the misconception that being the only intelligent life form on this planet. Our intelligence is due to the collective intelligence of all life forms that have grown for over 3.8 billion years on this planet. From the time when complex organic chemistry decided to undergo the emergence that we are expecting AI to undergo, and when life became self-reproducing into unicellular and multicellular life forms. And the overarching intelligence-led biological life on Earth has adapted to changing climatic conditions, environments, and multiple uh, extinction events. And human intelligence is a product of all that. And if we think that, let's say in a decade or two, we can make something, an artificial intelligent agent, nefarious or too good to solve all our problems, then we are missing something here. As a natural scientist, one also wonders, do cancerous cells in our body, do they have any intelligence? Do swarming bees and birds use any intelligence? Can billions of bacterial colonies present on biofilms, which we find along the roadside or in ponds, are they intelligent? I don't need to talk about the intelligence of the cognitive abilities of octopuses or apes or dolphins or whales. They are all intelligent in their own sense. And apart from intelligences here on Earth, there are again a group of scientists who get government funding to do something known as Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI. And they are also looking for intelligence, not here on this planet, but from some other solar systems or in some other galaxy. Now, that domain is a great black hole as AI is. But we do not worry so much about SETI because there is an uneducated certainty in our minds that humanity will encounter AI emergence well before extraterrestrial intelligence. But the question that comes to our mind is, what if we are wrong to presume that way? There's so much intelligence out there. Are we humans doing anything to comprehend, interact, cooperate, or transact with these kind of intelligence? No. Nature has been kind that we do not have an apex predator above humans anymore. Now that we enjoy this apex position, we must remember that no species has remained apex for too long. And hence it will be wise to study the science of various kinds of intelligences before we mock ourselves with cockeyed technology advancement in AI. And this deliberation is not vague at all. Let me tell you, the Convention of Migratory Species of United Nations Environment Program is looking at dolphins intelligence. The Great Apes Survival Program of UNEP is looking at intelligences of gorilla, bonobos, chimpanzees, orangutans. Then anti-whaling programs all over the world are also looking at the brilliance of whales. And the point, all these points are in parallel to the goal number 13, 14, and 15 of Sustainable Development Goals. So, well before we go deep into AI, we should just look back and see whether we are able to understand the various intelligences, and that will truly be a pluri-perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giri. Great to have a scientist looking at all kinds of intelligence and life forms with us. Thanks a lot. Let's move on now, and we move to our final speaker for this session, Dr. Mary Rizal. And Dr. Rizal is an anthropologist specializing in Asian cultures and design thinking. She's based in Tokyo and working globally in areas of applied anthropology, robotics, and technology. Dr. Rizal, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. And in a way, I'm very happy that I'm closing this conference because I think applied anthropology can bring everything together, being a science that needs to think of the academic meaning, of the philosophical meaning, and of the practical meanings. And what I hope I can do here is to somehow bring all the ideas that were said with a bit of a more realistic attitude and hopefully a solution that I'm thinking can solve some of the problems. I was in India 3 years ago when I was approached by a doctor who asked me to support the ASHA. She was working on breast cancer and she was working on helping ASHAs. And they needed an anthropologist, and they needed anthropologists because of very big research and accumulation of data that they had done with very sophisticated AIs. failed. Now, when we started working together, I realized it failed because the Asha are not a number. And this is how they actually thought about them. We have all those women all over, and we need to support them with some sort of a connection. But when I started researching better, I realized that we are talking about different women with different background, with different images, different patients, different literacy, all those social issues that computers will always, I believe, fail to see in details, but it takes only one person to destroy everything. So I would like, I keep in mind the time, I would like to share a short outline that I hope will make things a bit easier when we look at them. And I would like to offer a way in which we can think of intelligence as something changing and not as something static, because this is the problem I have with a lot of the summaries, the researchers that I hear about artificial intelligence, is that they think of it as something, and it's not something. It's really a work in process. Like our mind is not something. It may be a physical thing in our box, but we think all the time. So to think of an AI as a thing is like thinking of the brain as something that doesn't think really, but is here and now only. So let's see first, what do we mean by the words we use? Words mean different things in different cultures and in different languages, and people think in different ways. So when we think of a global AI, we already fail by not being able to speak the same language, the same signs, and obviously to the same people, because the same dog, if I'm going to Boston Dynamics, is immediately the Terminator, when in Japan, Japan is a Shinto culture where everything has a life and everything is also used with a verb of life and not like in English, he, she, and it. Everything is in the he, she. That is, artificial intelligence is very cute. And in one of the researches I was doing in order to develop a product, I encountered it face to face with a group of tourists who panicked from this very cute Aibo and immediately saw it as a potential spy who's going to destroy the world, and they didn't let their children play with it. So values, when you look at what values mean, and we don't talk about them only in an abstract sense, we see that the gap is huge, and we can't close this gap of values because they come from a long history. So we're basically looking at Western values that look at this as the future and singularity. Even in the virus and pandemic, we still think of singularity when we see the end of the world is going to come from small everyday things and probably from nature. And we're looking at Japan, where AI's goal is going to be this one, because it's a different history of artificial things, and everything artificial can have a life. And previous speaker mentioned that in different kind of philosophies when we talk about the place of things in our life. Now, the issues that are raised is how relative is culture and the fact that there are no absolute values. And maybe it would be a bit drastic to say that, but I don't believe there can be an ethical AI unless it's an AI on a very small area and targeting only a particular community. Because the moment we go into values, different communities define values in very different ways, and some of them reach huge sums of money. If you need to adapt the computer infrastructure between France and Japan, you need to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in completely new infrastructure because of their concept of privacy. And privacy means different types of protection. So we're coming from abstract ideas that eventually end up in a material thing that costs money, that somebody has to pay and has to think if it's worth it or not. It means we are not talking about values as ideas. We are talking about values as investment and as profits. We're talking about values as misunderstandings that we have to somehow solve between people, whether it's the people that we want to serve or whether it's even us when we go there. So all the values that are most basic are very different. Then the only solution is to move to a gray zone in the middle and to say, you know, there are no ethics. There can be a world of no ethics. And this is a world where we have no right and wrong. It's a world that goes in the middle, and it's a world that is in a process. And that's what I see a lot if we move between monotheism, which is the belief in one God, to polytheism, which is the belief in many gods. And this is what we have in Japan, where everything can be a god. Like maybe my cup was one of my ancestors. Who knows? Eventually, we're talking about such small particles. Who knows where we come from and what we really are? Now, based on this, when I look at the idea of even a basically thinking in AI, nothing changed along history. And that also was said before, whether I look on machines that think, or gods, or beliefs that we have that nature is observing us and has power of us, nothing changed. But our discourse hasn't changed either, and that's a very big problem. We are trying to change the world or meet the world today by using discourse and beliefs and narrative that we have been using for hundreds and some of it thousands of years. That is, we are still analyzing AI with the same words, with the same concepts. Are they really useful? Are we really still stuck in history and still think of the ancient gods when we think of the future of AI? Because in that sense, we're going nowhere. We're just moving in circles all the time, and nothing is going to be solved beside the philosophical discussion that is very interesting, but at some point, technology is going to beat us. And that's the only thing that changes. If I have to think what really changes, it is the technological advance, and it is the tools that exist around us that go faster, that change the structure of society, that change even our own psychology. If I think, for example, of intimacy that used to be in most cultures between small groups of people, and now people post nude sex images of their own friends online live for free, obviously something changes in the basic values that we live by. And this happens in many cultures. It's not one rare example anymore. And we are still with the same discourse as if we don't see these things, but we should, because this is our life that is changing, and these are going to be our children that live that way. So thinking about this, I feel that we have to go through a paradigm shift. We have to see how we change completely the way we talk about AI, the way we talk about computers, the way we think about the virtual existence. All those values that we know until now, they're not sustainable anymore. And I think with this COVID-19, they become even less sustainable. With this move into virtual existence, we question everything, and we see that. We see that in changing governments. We see that in discourses about what is democracy in the world today. And it was also raised when with other speakers who were talking about the big companies, the way they control, the way they manipulate. What does freedom mean in this world? How much are we manipulated? How much do we go there freely? What will happen to our work? So many people are giving everything for free, but we still live by money, real or virtual. We still pay for food. Then what does work mean today? How do we define labor? How do we define relationships? That is, everything is very much changing, and we are afraid. And because we're afraid, I think we're using the traditional discourse, because we go to the safe language we know. We go to the traditional values we know. We go to Buddhism and Confucianism, and we're looking for answers in the past, but I don't believe they will be there as answers, but only as an individual support. So what are we so afraid of, and what are we so much trying to protect? And do we need protection? The world is not a safe thing. The answer is very simple eventually. We're all afraid to die. And whatever we do is to try to feel that there is a continuation. We feel we need to save the world. But if I look at it from a perspective of life on Earth, nobody needs saving. There is no saving because there is no danger. There is a life on Earth that continues, and things have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Individually, as a group, as a culture, that's the nature of things on this planet. Then all the fear and all the discourse of fear around, is irrelevant, is only reflecting our own psychology that we try to apply to an artificial machine in order to try to understand ourselves. So when I think of a robot, a service robot, or an AI, I think of it like a psychotherapy, an individual psychotherapy. I talk about it because I try to understand how my brain works, because the human brain is very much of a machine. If we think of a baby that was born, what do they know? Look at them. They have a basic character, and that's it. Then we need to learn to let go of what we have and to start thinking of a completely new perspective of how to look at the future, because the future has started and it's going to get more and more difficult. So if now we think of an AI as a sort of half human, reflective human, mirror image, psychological support, calculator, however we look at it, we have to look at it as not a static thing, but a being in the process that can change and will change every day, like our values, like our lives. Then setting standard rules is taking us nowhere. That's something I see very much in Europe, where I work with a group of lawyers, where the past is the future. The laws are the laws. We have to think, we have to decide. And then I think, and what about the immigrants? What about all those who die in the sea? Where are their rights? Are they not the same kind of humans? And then you start having those problems of how do we define things? Now, one solution, and I'm almost done, I see the time. One solution is to go to process philosophy, and just the previous speaker was talking about it, talking about new ideas of embedding the whole network in new harmony. And it started from, surprisingly, process theology, where the idea, the monotheistic idea of good and bad, and you have to be good or you're going to be punished, they are very much against it. They said, no, it's a bit like the Japanese way. People do bad things because they're human, and there is no good and bad. Therefore, crime, even the worst crime, is considered an accident, and you're expected, first of all, to apologize and to understand that you had an accident. You apologize, and then you fix your ways. And therefore, there is a more humanistic and, I would say, realistic even view of humans as we're complicated, we're emotional, we're illogical, we're doing good things, we're doing bad things. Sometimes we do something good for one thing and we hurt others. That's life. We can't avoid it. It doesn't matter how non-ethical it is. And ethics are also very localized eventually, and they can't be all over the world the same. And this is why I bring human rights, because people talk about human rights all the time, but honestly, one group's human rights is the abuse of another. It's always like that. Wherever you give a group an extra, somebody else is going to lose something. Then this balance somehow has to be changed if you look at the world in a different view, with different eyes. Now, process philosophy.
Mary,
yep.
We need to wrap up now so we can have a few questions. Sorry to
yeah, it's the last slide.
Okay.
That's the last slide.
Okay.
That one. Where I offer as a solution swarm intelligence. Because I think if we take the AI into swarms, and that's my job as an anthropologist, to work on the swarm intelligence, if we transfer to swarms, we have closer clouds, we have closer communities, we have AI, but it's limited and it's very much targeting specific issues. And you're getting all together when they supervise themselves and they adjust every single day. That's it. And I'm finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mary Rizal. Thanks a lot for wrapping us up nicely with this applied anthropological view and bringing some solutions for us. Thanks a lot. So colleagues, all speakers on the panel, and those of you who have been patient enough to stay with us, we are going to have a few questions. Our time is a bit short. So what I propose is I will take from the audience questions a few questions, which I will read out. I'm asking the speakers, please note, whichever question you want to respond to, and then I will allow the all the speakers to do a quick response, maybe about 1 or 2 minutes each, so that we can get in as much and get all of you in as well. There was one question that was directed to an individual, which I will do first, which is Swamiji. So that first question, others can react to it as well if they would like to. Swamiji, that question to you was regarding compassion. Is it not too intrinsic an attribute to be catalyzed by real external stimuli?
Yes.
I'll do a few other questions and then you can answer, but that one was directed to you, but let me just do the others as well. How does the distraction attention economy implicate AI? If all colleagues can take a look at that. Do Asian philosophies have better answers to the trolley problem, which is a problem of dilemma in ethics, which many of you I know are aware of, than the AI world will have to deal with, for example, driverless cars and so on? And then the final one that I will pose, that has been posed, that I will ask, can there be an honest AI and a dishonest AI? So Swamiji, the first question on compassion, if you can start with that, and then I will turn to colleagues to reflect on some of these. Over to you.
Thank you. Just an observation on that question, that yes, compassion is intrinsic. Even I think neuroscience is talking about mirror neurons and so on and so forth. So it is intrinsic, whether it's at a spiritual level, at a psychological level, or even at the brain level. But as the questionnaire, the word that the questionnaire used was catalyze. Certainly there are external factors which catalyze the exercise of compassion, and attention or distraction. These are central factors. Studies have shown that if a person is distracted, then they will not be compassionate because they don't even notice the sufferings of others. So there are pictures of in the New York subway, very busy, thousands of people rushing by, and there's one homeless person maybe fainted or something, and on the subway platform, nobody's paying attention until one person notices and rushes to help. Then a lot of people gathered together to help. What was the catalyst? The catalyst was attention. So if we are distracted, then compassion, though intrinsic, will not be converted into practical measures to help people.
Thank you very much. Let's move now to the other questions, and please unmute as you like and go ahead rather than my calling on individuals. Ambassador, I see you already.
Yes. So how is AI related to the attention problem? In fact, AI's current rise goes back to the use of this attention to specific content that we are shown to make money. So how do Google, Facebook, and others make money? They direct advertisements at us. So whatever we pay attention to becomes a trigger for the AI to present options to us. So that's the material level link. But I think the philosophical, spiritual link is that it is kind of taking us away from the reality of our own lives. So we are forgetting to cultivate our inner garden, our relationships, and taking care of some of the problems in the world. So you see this in this movie Ready Player One, where you see this. Everyone is absorbed in these digital games, but the real world is a mess outside. So our attention is being distracted from some of the real challenges that for thousands of years our elders have told us to care about.
Thank you. Who would like to go next?
If I may.
Dr. Hershaw, go ahead.
Yes. I think on the attention economy, one thing to keep in mind is that it really is about the time that's involved. It's a time grab as well as an attention grab. To use just some older numbers, I'm sure it's changed a little bit now, but as of about 1.5 years ago, the average person on planet Earth was spending about 3.5 hours a day watching television. They were spending another 2.5 hours a day doing social media. So let's just take it 6 hours a day, multiply by 7 billion people. That's a lot of hours. It's 42 billion hours a day. Now, if humanity were taking that 42 billion hours and rather than doing social media connecting, or rather than watching sitcoms, or rather than watching Terminator films, or things about AI, and we're instead learning a new language, learning to play an instrument, cooking meals for grandparents, taking care of people in the neighborhood, what would the world look like if our attention were being differently applied? So it's not just about the qualitative transformation of attention that goes along with the distractive stuff that was being talked about by Swamiji. It is really about the time that's being distracted from other things that we could be using our attention for. And that, I think, is really a dangerous thing, because one of the inducements of this new technology is to give us freedoms of choice. And for those of you raised in America, like I was, freedom of choice is such a basic value. You cannot imagine a world in which you don't have freedom of choice. So what is this new technological system, this new attention economy giving us? Total freedom of choice about what you experience moment to moment. And I find it really insidious, because while a world of choice is better than a world with no choices, no doubt about it. But choice is not a good version of what it means to be free. Simply to be able to give a choice between X number of different options online is not an act of freedom. Freedom comes from struggling with the difficulty of overcoming our own resistances internally, our own karma, to be able to act in a way that is truly compassionate, where compassion is really a practice that takes time, it takes effort. And I think this is where the attention economy is really dangerous for humanity, is selling us short on our ability to engage in the intelligent human practices that are needed to realize more humane and equitable societies.
Following on, just a comment following on from Ambassador Gill and Dr. Hershog. There was a comment in the chat about meditation, that wouldn't AI do the labor and free up time and enable us to maybe meditate better? No, it won't, because AI can free up time from labor. It's a labor saving thing like many technologies, but it will not leave you alone. As Dr. Hershog just mentioned, it wants our attention. It's not going to let go of our attention. So it's not going to help us in freeing attention for meditation or what else.
Very, very important point. Did Dr. Giri or Ms. Rizal wanted to comment on any of those questions?
I would like to comment on the last comment that I see here about Confucianism and about the clash between individual societies and collective society, which I think is a major problem. No, it's a major gap. It's not a problem, because it's a major gap because I don't think it can be closed. And that's also related to exactly this answer about what is the meaning of freedom. I come from a very individualistic society, and I moved to Japan that is extremely collective, more collective than any other collective. That is, outside people are always very careful to behave properly. And at the beginning, it was so difficult, and many people who come from the Western world, they quit. And I stayed because I had to do my research here, and I slowly adjusted. And not only did I adjust, but I see the values of the collective more than the value of the individual. And I see that because when you look over time, and also when you're a bit older, you realize your individual lives matter less. And what matters is also what you leave behind. And what you leave behind, if you're an individual, is a society of mess. And collectives leave a better group. More organized group, where at least here people don't want to go because life is good outside. It's very a very good gap of how we look at the world. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. The I am because we are. Right. Dr. Giri, anything to add? But there is another question which I'd like to pose to you. You want to wait for that one, or anything to add? Can unmute.
I didn't see it. It was directed to me, but if I may comment on the attention economy.
Let me ask the other question there, and you will see.
Sure.
This one I think is broader, and then a quick 1-minute answer from each member of the panel, and we'll wrap it up. So this is interesting. It says, why have Asian and Eastern perspectives been left out of the ethical AI discourse when countries like India and China, and one might add Japan, are leaders of technological innovation? So let's start with you, Dr. Giri, as you're on the screen. You want to quickly react to that question?
I don't think any of the Asian nations have been left behind. So if you look at the ICT, information communication technology development, which is coming out of various ecosystems in Japan, South Korea, or China, they have been delving into discourses on connecting the native philosophies into the tech development from their side. Now, if you look at the representation from these three countries in International Telecommunications Union, or the 3GPP or 5GPP, which are the technology standard bodies, it is there. And you cannot bring philosophy without introducing your own people who have been grown and nurtured in those philosophies since childhood. So people cannot bring philosophy into a discourse on technology just at a, on the tip of their fingertips, but they have to come really saturated from the sanskaras, if I may put it.
Let me ask Ambassador Gill.
I think it's a fair question. So in the East, in China, India, and Japan, there has been a lack of multidisciplinary perspectives on technology. So in a sense, the West has stolen a march on the East in terms of being early on these bringing social science, anthropological perspectives to technology. Technology is looked at in a narrower lens, through a narrower lens in the East. The other problem I see with the East is these quick assumptions about what spirituality is. I gave the example of Buddhi, not really understanding what Buddhi is, but taking it into the AI domain without adequate reflection. So we assume a lot. We know Vedanta, we know Buddhism, we know mindfulness, but I think we have to really walk the talk. And I think this is a great discussion in that context. While I have the floor, the trolley problem, would East and West differ? I think fundamentally it's about choice. It's not about, you cannot optimize this. So in the moment, a human sentient being, a conscious agent will make a choice. And if you see the end of Matrix, Neo says, I'm different because I make a choice. So that's the quintessential human thing to do in the context of the trolley problem. You can't optimize this.
Dr. Hershak, quick comment?
Yes, I think part of the problem with the incorporation of Asian perspectives into the global discourse on AI is that Western ethical systems have tended to be principle-based, and many Asian, African, the global Southern ethical perspectives have tended to be practice-based. You engage in a practice and a cultivation of becoming ethical rather than having a set of ethical principles that are set universally, which then you aspire to live up to. Having those ethical principles set up in advance as so-called universals is very easy. It's very appealing, and it makes it something that everybody can buy into easily. So you go to China, you go to India, you go to Korea, you go to Israel, you ask, what is your AI ethics included? It'll be accountability, transparency, privacy, etc. They're all the same words. You ask anybody in any of those regions, what does privacy mean? What does privacy mean to you in practice? Not as some principle, but in practice, what does it mean? It's very, very different. And I think that what we're grappling with is the need to get down to that level of nitty-gritty. It's why I say that we need an ethical ecosystem. As in any ecosystem, you have different species. Western ethical systems are great, they're wonderful, but they have blind spots. There's things they cannot do. And Asian traditions, African traditions, indigenous peoples' traditions can actually provide other things just as species within a larger ecosystem contribute to the vitality of the system as a whole. We do not have a global ethical ecosystem. That's an aspiration. And we will only arrive at it if every ethical system around the world has the temerity to stand up to the so-called universalism of the Western discourse and say, no, 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 no. We deserve a place at the table too.
Ms. Rizal, a quick comment before I give the last word to Swamiji.
I think I agree with Ambassador Gale that collective societies and individual societies have both advantages and disadvantages. Collective societies are more stable and more safe, but they move slower, and they're very careful not to disturb the harmony. And because of that, you have to be very careful what you choose, and the benefit of the many would exceed innovation. And that's really the simple answer.
Swamiji, you started us off, so it's only fitting I give you the last word to close us off. Over to you for a minute.
A couple of observations. One is an interesting anecdote, I think, which you might find relevant here, regarding the trolley problem. I was in Professor Amartya Sen's class on ethics at Harvard University last year when he mentioned the ethics problem, the trolley problem, and one of the students there said that, which of the two options would you choose? You change the track and 5 people are killed, or you don't change the track and 10 people are killed. One of the students said, both options are nasty. As human beings, it's our duty, it's our ethical duty to think out of the box, beyond the parameters of the trolley problem, and find an option which is less nasty. So I think AI might be that game changer. I mean, on a positive note, AI might be the game changer which allows us to change the parameters of the problem. One final observation about why Asian perspectives are not so much present in talking about the ethics of AI. I think it also goes back to the historical neglect of Asian philosophy, Indian philosophy, Chinese and Japanese philosophy, because of the colonial context. There was a time when it was said that there is no philosophy worth the name east of Suez, So over time, that perspective has thankfully changed, and more people are talking about Asian philosophy, including Indian philosophy. It's been taught in a number of universities. We need to immerse ourselves, as Dr. Giri said. We need to have the samskaras to immerse ourselves in for example, Indian philosophy. I remember as a student, as a high school student, I studied logic. It was a very interesting subject. And all that was taught to us was Aristotelian logic. And it's much later, when I became a monk, that I discovered that India had this extraordinary, sophisticated and very deep system of Nyaya and Navya Nyaya. In fact, it was the most sophisticated system of logic before the development of modern mathematical, of modern symbolic logic. So we need to immerse ourselves in those traditions. As Ambassador Gill said, that a better understanding of what Vedanta, Buddhism, Confucianism would imply for ethics. And then we can contribute to this new debate on ethics in AI. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thanks to all of you for your patience. I hope this rich feast of ideas was worth your staying for the little extra time that we ran over. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to all our speakers for this final session. You did a great job. It's really, really fascinating to hear all of you and the intersection of your ideas. It is now my duty and my pleasure to turn it back to Nabila.
Thank you so much, Professor Naresh Singh. As you very rightly said, there's such a wealth of erudition on this panel, and thank you so much to the panelists. However, we cannot end this long dialogue without a bit of looking ahead. So now it is my honor to invite Ms. Radhika Kaul Batra, the Chief of Staff of the United Nations Resident Coordinator's Office, to look ahead, deliver the closing remarks as well as the vote of thanks. And Radhika, I just want to start off your vote of thanks by conveying our collective thanks to you for being the steward who steered us so well during the course of this conference.
And no, it's been a collective effort, and a rich feast of ideas indeed. What a high note this dialogue is ending on. Swami Sarvapriyananda, Ambassador Amandeep Gill, Dr. Peter Hershock, Dr. Chaitanya Giri, Dr. Mary Reisel, we are delighted that you made time to join us today in what I think is one of the deepest thinking, meaningful conversations on technology that many of us, me certainly, have had the privilege to listen to. When the idea for this dialogue was conceived a couple months ago, The aspiration was to bring together the best minds from across the globe to delve deeper into the depths of the nuances that inform the thinking on the ethics of artificial intelligence. We wanted to explore the nuances from a plurality of perspectives, most significantly from that of the Eastern civilization, and that point has been made repeatedly, and to bring out a report on the proceedings to inform future thinking. And what an enriching experience it has been. Over the last 2 days, we've had the privilege of listening to 27 speakers from 8 countries: India, Thailand, South Africa, UK, Sweden, Japan, Switzerland, US. Our speakers included technology ethicists, philosophers, mathematicians, logicians, policymakers who have authored AI policy, legal experts, thinkers on the ethics of robotics, educationists, spiritual leaders, theologians, anthropologists, scientists, economists, diplomats, experts on tech governance and leading authorities on Vedanta, Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism, Buddhism, Bhagavad Puran, and the Asian schools of thought. That is quite an impressive gathering of the brightest minds. So thank you. Thank you. Our deepest gratitude to the speakers and the facilitators. We are grateful for your time and for sharing your insights, and look forward to connecting with you again to take this important dialogue forward into concrete policy perspectives and solutions. Our request is that if you have write-ups of your presentations, kindly share them with us. Our thanks to the many, many participants who kept the conversation going with their questions and comments. Our gratitude to colleagues from the OP Jindal Global University and UN in India for pulling the dialogue off despite the many challenges that the devastating wave of the pandemic threw our way, and there were many. Special thanks to the leadership of Professor C. Rajkumar, founding Vice Chancellor, OP Jindal Global University, and Renata Desalian, UN Resident Coordinator. We have been reminded that intelligence is a work in progress, that autonomy comes with responsibility, that intelligence is collective and participatory, that AI is not an equalizing technology, but an optimizing one, and that we need an international, collaborative, global compact type of approach on ethics and AI. There is already enormous amounts of work that has been undertaken, as we have seen from the rich presentations. The UN Secretary General's Roadmap on Digital Cooperation, UNESCO's initiative on the development of a comprehensive global standard-setting instrument to provide AI with strong ethical basis, and Niti Aayog's publication of India's approach on responsible AI for all are other notable examples. So in the hope that the Salt March moment will find us soon and take us towards a comprehensive global understanding and agreement of foundational principles of ethics in AI, a huge thank you. Until next time. Over to you, Nabila.
Thank you so much, Radhika, for so beautifully summing up. And thank you to all of you, all the distinguished panelists who've stayed with us over the course of 2 days. At this point, we've had almost 8 hours of discussions and conversations. So I just want to say thank you once again. And as Radhika rightly pointed out, we will be in touch and hope we can take this forward into sort of concrete policy inputs and do more with you in the future. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Nabila. Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.